All right. We're going to call to order this regular meeting of the City Council successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency. Would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jeff, do we have any changes to the order of the agenda?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Any requests from the dais on order of the agenda? Okay. Greg, do we have a report from closed session?
There's no report from the closed session.
Thank you. Next item is council communications and announcements. Cameron.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening. I have a few things to report on since our last council meeting. The first one is I attended the Council of Cities dinner, which was hosted in San Carlos this year, or excuse me, this month at Piacere, and Mark and Jeff did a nice job organizing a panel discussion around outsourcing and regionalization of public safety services, which was a great discussion among the other mayors and city councilmen from various cities. I thought it was very informative. I had an opportunity to take a tour of the San Carlos Charter School a couple weeks ago, and this is a topic that's being discussed a lot these days. I assume if my colleagues haven't been, I encourage you guys to take a tour. It was very informative. I got a chance to go in all the classrooms and see how education happens at a charter school. It was very, very informative. With a couple of my colleagues, I attended the Progress Seminar this past weekend, which is it's a big conference for city and county officials for Monterey. That's hosted by the Redwood City and San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce. There were a number of really interesting topics, just a couple that I'll touch on. One is a big county initiative called the Big Lift, which is aimed to basically provide universal preschool for San Mateo County residents by 2020. There was a discussion that I attended on transportation policy that was very interesting, and one about using technology to improve the functioning of government and communication with residents. The final thing I wanted to say was is Happy Passover to everyone. My wife is Jewish. We hosted a Seder dinner last night for many of our friends and family. And I do want to suggest perhaps that we consider in the future thinking about not holding council meetings on major religious holidays, or at least I'll hear it from my in-laws. So thank you very much.
Fair enough. Matt.
Thank you. I have 4 items I wanted to bring up. The first one has to do with Mr. Miller. He's contacted me again regarding his tree issue and the sidewalks and so forth. I do understand from him that he had a couple of other council members visit, so I don't want to say too much about it, but because of that. But I had asked if there were a way we could have that come to the council and have the situation looked at in a broader policy sense. But actually I was thinking about it and thought, we also act in some respects as a judicial body, and what we may want to do is allow Mr. Miller to come and present his case to us as an individual in his own individual circumstances, rather than have this thing where he's meeting with a council member and might hear feedback from that person and then meets with somebody else and gets feedback from them. If he could just come to us as a council, and then we avoid any issues with Brown Act or whatever. He's really looking for some kind of resolution on the matter, though, and I think he's getting hugely frustrated by the process that he's being asked to go through. In addition to that, I would also note, I don't know if other council members received this, but I received a letter from a Dan Abrahamson, who lives on Rosewood, and he has a concern about our policy that we instituted about a decade ago, where homeowners were made responsible for sidewalks and trees in front of their house, and by his estimation, it's a failing policy because there's a lot of places in town where there are trip hazards and trees, pushing up the sidewalk, and these things are not being taken care of in a quick enough manner, and we have hazards around town. Whereas if it were totally the city's responsibility, perhaps we wouldn't have that. So I don't know how the council would like to proceed with that, whether we want to go ahead and agendize an item I think we'd agreed to at some point, that would be the broader issue, or as I'm proposing tonight regarding Mr. Miller, allow him to come and present his case. I know it wouldn't be the normal 2-minute that he would get, but be able to present his case to the full council, and we make a decision either that night or take in the information and think about it. But I think we need to do something. I'll pause and allow any comment.
I just, as I recall, Jeff, I think and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think when we talked about this in one of the earlier iterations, what I recall hearing from staff was that there would be a fair amount of work involved in discussing it as a policy level issue. And my recollection was that was what caused it not to be agendized. Personally, I don't have an objection to any citizen coming to talk to us. There's a little bit of an issue, I think, about setting a precedent where we do that outside of the 2 or 3 minute general public comment thing. But the other thing is, if it's going to still take a lot of effort by staff to prepare, other than having a one-off presentation, I'm not sure how we deal with it.
Well, I think what we were presented with the last time the council discussed the possibility of agendizing this, which was a much broader topic than just this one gentleman's tree. I think probably, maybe get a little bit of feedback from the city attorney here. I think if we're just looking at this one individual, it's going to require some of Greg's time to investigate the legal implications of this issue. I think most of the councils had an opportunity to meet with this individual. So if you want to allow simply some time for him to present his case and then provide some direction, there's probably very little staff time that would be involved in that.
Through the chair, as much as that would be a nice thing, then you're going to set it. I mean, quite honestly, Mr. Abramson's going to come in next, right? And then Mr. Jones is going to follow him, and Ms. Smith is going to come in after that, and we're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 a meeting. And if we're going to talk about this, then I think we should just revisit. I was on the council when as I remember, we passed the policy, and most every city in the peninsula has the same policy. I think San Francisco has it too. I don't have a problem discussing the policy, but I'm concerned about just the one-off, because then there's another. How are we going to? I mean, I know at least 3 people that would come in personally, because they've talked to me about it. So I don't know. That's how I feel. I think we need to do the whole and again, I don't know how much work that really is. You're just repeating here's the policy. So let's have a broad discussion about it. I don't know how much work that is. Am I missing something about if we wanted to just look at the policy itself?
Well, I think the staff needs to do some research in terms of what the cost implications are and those kinds of things to make sure that the council has a full picture.
Oh, absolutely. No, I didn't mean to denigrate
and
that.
That's where the staff work comes in. Right. Simply putting if you just want to talk from a policy level without any additional information, we can provide the staff reports that were done years ago when this was considered by the council moving forward.
Well, I don't know how much, again, I don't know what the dollars and cents of it are, but, I mean, I'm very concerned, again, nothing against Mr. Miller, I spoke with him myself, but I just feel like that's opening up Pandora's box to have that situation. I'd rather have, if we're going to have a discussion, I'd rather have it in a general sense.
Any other, and Matt, I will come back to you for your comments.
Sure.
But any other comments from the side about, we're talking about agenda, whether we wish to agendize this or not.
I think I'd like to go talk to him. I apologize. I am one of the people that has not talked to him. Part of that's just been my work schedule, but I did make a note to myself in a column in the next couple of days. I do have his number. I think I'd like to have a conversation with him before I agree to put it on the agenda, because I agree with Mr. Grisilli. You just don't know where this leads, and I have a couple other people I'm thinking of that I know that would want to present their cases for their issues as well.
And I did have a chance to talk to him, but my sense talking to him is that this is a very sort of idiosyncratic and specific case that doesn't have a lot of policy implications. And so I'm not really inclined to look at it from a policy perspective right now.
Okay, does that mean you'd be willing to look at it or interested in looking at it on a one-off level?
I tend to agree with Bob, and so I
okay,
would prefer,
that's fine.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Okay, I'm not hearing a second on it. Okay, although that's subject to Ron having a conversation with him.
It's not that I don't want to, I really need to talk to him.
Okay, I'll wait. If Mr. Miller will wait. The other subject I wanted to bring up, and I talked to the mayor about this, was I was quite impressed with the presentation we received from Matt and his consultants that he brought with him on Holly Street. And I thought the choices brought to us and the full breadth and scope of what the consultant looked at was pretty interesting. And that's what I had in mind for Cordilleras when I said we need to look at this, I think, from the perspective of it's 3 streets wrapped into one when you look at the conditions out there, and it would be nice to look at it as one complete corridor from Britain to San Carlos Avenue. And what I had said to Mark was possibly we might want to put out an RFP to look at it in that way, and of course we would entertain the same consultant that did Holly Street if they responded to the RFP, and take a look at this project in that manner, if there's an interest from the council.
For what it's worth, as Matt's saying, I had an interest in seeing that done as well. I don't know if anybody else does. I'm presuming that initially what it would be is input from staff on what that type of project would cost and what the scope of it would be.
Yeah, one step at a time.
Right.
Yeah.
So since there are 2 of us, we will ask to put that on the agenda, put that on the
We'll
list.
place that on an upcoming agenda.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, 2 more items. I'll try to go quickly on this. The one is I did notice, I'm sure the rest of you did too, that I believe there was a bill passed out of the state legislature that it's just a recommendation type bill. It doesn't have any teeth necessarily in terms of enforcement, but the state legislature was advising, if you can say that, against contracting for services, cities contracting for services. I don't know how Mr. Mullen voted on it, or I don't think it went through the Senate. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
But-
so that was, if I may, it was discussed at the Progress Seminar this weekend, and both Kevin Mullen and then Rich Gordon, who used to represent this area, both abstained.
Abstained. Well, the thing that I was thinking about is if we might be interested in talking about it at some point as a council. It wouldn't take a lot of time, I'm sure, and then giving direction to the mayor to write a letter to Mr. Mullen and whoever else we think would be appropriate, saying we disagree with this direction because we contract some of our services and have found it to save us money and we get good service. So I think we should take a stance, though.
Support for that? People want to discuss that? If you don't want to, you don't. In the interest of time, you don't have to say anything. And I'm not trying to prevent people from talking. I'm just trying to move the meeting along.
I would like to talk about it, actually. I
Okay.
would.
Well, that makes 2. So, oh, I'm sorry. We have to get staff's input on.
Yeah, just want to add really quick here, because in the last iteration of the council code of conduct and ethics, a change was made that allowed the mayor and the city manager, because of the timing on these things, to consult on this legislation. And it's been a while because this thing's had a couple of iterations. But the mayor and I have spoken about this in the past, if you recall, and we have sent letters of opposition on this bill as it's come forward, and this was the second iteration of this bill. I think it was in the last legislative session as well, opposing it.
Okay.
Would it be worth, before we decide to agendize, it would be worth having staff circulate copies of those letters just so
Yeah.
people can see them? Okay.
And it is just a resolution, right? It's not,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Not a law.
What I was going to say was a non-binding resolution.
Those are the
And I would say
technical
that
terms.
also the League of California Cities has sort of lobbied heavily against this, and largely cities throughout California have been kind of on that side. So,
Right. Well, I just thought of it to send a firm and strong message, hopefully from 5 council members here in San Carlos, through the mayor to Mr. Mullen and whoever else we think we should send it to. That's the thing I was thinking about. And then the last item is just to close the loop on something. I had brought up the fact that ABAG MTC had a joint meeting in Sacramento, and it seemed like we did not get noticed on that. It turns out, at least what ABAG is telling us, is that they did send one email to Mr. Grisilli, but we've been through an election, and Bob was no longer our delegate, and so he did what I probably would have done, which was ignore it. And
If I saw it, I
if you even
apologize.
saw
I
it, no,
remember-
you don't have to apologize. To me, it just brought up the whole issue of how these things get noticed. These are regional bodies, and I think because they're regional bodies, they need to do extra work on noticing public meetings. So I just wanted to close the loop on it because I asked staff to try and dig into that, and that's what they found out, or at least that's what ABAG is telling them, is that one email was sent to Mr. Grisilli. But I'm going to be bringing this up at a later time after talking further with the city manager about the issue.
and so just there is an ABAG General Assembly meeting this Friday, which I will be attending. So.
Very good.
Perhaps we should remind ABAG that electrons are cheap. Bob?
A couple of things. We had a meeting today of the Silicon Valley Clean Water Joint Powers Group, which is our wastewater group, Joint Powers. And we passed a balanced budget with no deficit for the next fiscal year starting July 1st. The other thing, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to bring up is we have not really, we voted a while back on the variance to the Transit Village, and for some reason that seems to be in limbo. And I've heard through the grapevine that one of the issues that the Samtrans is having difficulty with is the shuttle situation, where we want to move the shuttles off of the east side and put them on the west side. And I voted for that, and I think it's a good idea. But what they brought up, which I didn't realize, to be quite honest, is that some of the shuttles, a couple of them, only a couple, are actual Samtrans shuttles. They're not private shuttles. And I always thought all the shuttles and the cabs, well, cabs certainly are private, but I thought all the shuttles were private shuttles. So I was wondering if I got another colleague to agree with me that we could bring that back and discuss that to see if we wanted to change the way we blanketed all the shuttles, and if possibly we might have a discussion about allowing Samtrans to still possibly have the shuttles on the east side, assuming there were just a couple of them as opposed to all the private shuttles.
Is there anybody like to support bringing that back?
I would. I think that's a project that, even though it took a long time to get to a consensus, that's an issue that even if I end up not changing my mind, I think we should talk about it.
All right, we will add that to the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I have.
Sure. Ron?
Thank you. I think the week of the 24th, I counted up all the hours. I think that is when my council-related activities reached their peak. I think I counted 19 hours. That was a week of a council meeting, a Grand Boulevard Initiative Task Force, a HART meeting, a Caltrain meeting, and finally a Council of Cities dinner. Wreaked havoc on my health, but I had a good time, so it was a lot of fun. I'm glad we're having the Caltrain agenda item Caltrain is on the agenda tonight because there's some information that I got at that meeting that I'll just wait and share that information when we reach that topic. I also went to the Progress Seminar, attended some of the same meetings that Cameron and Mark did, but I also went to the one on there was a session on the drought in California, and it was a very interesting discussion. And while a lot of the meeting was depressing, and we've been talking a lot about what our strategies are to deal with it here in San Carlos, the Bay Area seems to be a little bit better off than the rest of the state, just because we've done a lot of planning. The other thing I found out and gave me kind of hope for the future is that there are some pilot projects that are being looked at that may help us effectively deal with not only this shortage but future water shortages. I learned that there's 500 million gallons of wastewater every single day that gets dumped into San Francisco Bay. 500 million gallons. I couldn't even get my head around that. But it costs a lot of money if you put in a desalination plant after that water's gone into the bay. So there are some projects, I believe, in San Diego and one other location where they're going to be looking at treating that water to drinking water quality before it ever gets into any bay. And there was a remark that they want the people who run that facility to actually drink the water in public before they ask the rest of us to drink it. But anyway, that was a very interesting discussion. And then the last thing I'd like to bring up is, as long as we're talking about things that we'd like to see on the agenda, there was an article in one of the local papers a couple of weeks ago about what the FCC is doing. They've been looking at adding new regulations that are going to make it even more difficult for cities to regulate wireless facilities in their own cities. And since we just went through that, it was a difficult process, and now if this issue comes back to us again because of FCC regulations, it may be even more difficult for us to regulate it. And I'd like for us to have a discussion about that, maybe even send a letter stating our position on it. And I think that if other cities do it, it might send a message to the FCC that they just, can't issue regulations without some impact on local municipalities.
Jeff, I would presume that if we were to add something like that to the agenda, the staff footprint, resource footprint would be relatively minor on that, correct?
I understand from the city attorney he's already developing a memo on that, so there may not be any footprint other than the time in the meeting.
It's actually a good skill for city attorneys to read minds. That's good. Because I was going to say, I agree with Ron, so that makes two of us. In the interest of time, I'd like to see that we add that to the agenda pool. Also, in the interest of time, I'm going to be brief here because we do have a fairly long agenda tonight. I finally had an opportunity to do a ride-along both with Engine 16 and with the Sheriff's Department. They were both very, very interesting, and I really appreciate both public safety agencies educating me as much as they did. And one thing in particular I'll say, I was very impressed with the for lack of a better term, the sociological side of policing, the judgment calls that officers make in trying to affect behavioral change and not just hand out tickets. And I thought that was a very, very insightful thing, and I very much appreciated the experience there, as I also, as I said, appreciated the experience of being with Engine 16. I, too, went to the Progress Seminar. I, too, heard that 500 million gallon a day thing. I have to tell you, I've been testing it, Ron, with people after I've come back, and even though it's, I tell them we can get it to drinking water standards, nobody wants to drink the water.
Not surprising.
So there's a little bit of a, PR problem there, I think. The other thing I learned there, which was very interesting, was we tend to focus a lot in thinking about climate change and the impact on society in certain narrow ways. One speaker talked about how it's, I can't speak for the science on whether these are really the only two alternatives, but he was saying that it's unclear whether climate change will trigger California moving into a dry, warm environment or a wet, warm environment. Either one actually is bad for us. Dry, warm means there's not enough water, which means we have to spend a ton of money to get water here for the 39-ish million people who already live here. Oddly enough, wet, warm is almost as bad, because something I didn't appreciate is that the single largest reservoir system in California ain't a reservoir, it's the snowpack. And if you get rain instead of snow, we actually do not have a system for capturing the same amount of precipitation. And we would have to spend, on the order of tens and tens of billions of dollars building a reservoir system. So something to think about as the discussion moves forward. And then lastly, I attended CCAG meeting. It was very interesting in terms of an overview of various ABAG type projects. There is a bunch of discussion going on about possibly trying to do something about the congestion on Highway 101, which I won't bore you with tonight, but there will be future discussions about that, and I think the council may wish to weigh in on that at some point. So with that, we will move to Jeff, if you have any comments on the city administrative business.
No additional comments this evening, Mr. Mayor.
All right, then we will move to presentations. I believe we have one presentation tonight from Cecily Harris, who is representing the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District.
While we wait, Mr. Mayor, I just recalled I did have one thing I wanted to make sure we announced, which is that we have a PG&E's holding a community meeting in San Carlos this Wednesday at 5 o'clock at the Trinity Presbyterian Church.
Good, thank you.
What am I doing wrong? Oh, from beginning, sorry. Good evening, City Council of San Carlos, staff, neighbors, and friends. My name is Cecily Harris, and I'm the president of the Board of Directors of Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, and I represent San Carlos. I'd like to thank you for an opportunity to address you this evening so I can tell you about the district, our recent vision plan process, and our upcoming bond measure, Measure AA. The district, usually called MinPen, was originally formed in Santa Clara County in 1972. We now have 26 preserves, totaling 62,000 acres in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz counties. The lands we manage extend from San Francisco Bay to the Pacific Ocean and defines the western skyline as viewed from the peninsula and Silicon Valley. We're open 365 days of the year, free of charge. We've served 715,000 residents in 17 cities and are supported primarily through local property taxes. Our policy is set by a 7-member elected board of directors. We have 120 employees and 500 volunteers who provide an additional 18,000 hours of service annually. In fact, we have 42 of these volunteers who live here in San Carlos. We have long-term partnerships with all of the cities in our service area, and we partner on acquisition of parcels and key connecting trails, long-term environmental education programs for tens of thousands of children in the region. And in fact, our school program has worked for San Carlos and has brought children to the Daniels Nature Center and to our preserves. Pocos Ridge, one of the district's most popular preserves, continues to be the location of many of our docent-led hikes. It's located near San Carlos in unincorporated San Mateo County, and hopefully you've all visited there. You know, it's right on Edgewood Road, right near Highway 280. We had about 30 programs there in the last 2 years and have had 9 so far in 2014, with many more programs scheduled for spring and summer. Our hike topics have included sunrise hikes, spring wildflowers, local history, hikes with canine companions, and seasonal highlights. You may be aware that there is a 13-acre dog park in Pocos Ridge. In 2004, we thank San Carlos for supporting our boundary expansion to the ocean in San Mateo County, which has allowed us to protect a world-class landscape and support the production of local sustainable food. As a result of this expansion, we've protected nearly 10,000 acres of rural lands on the San Mateo coast. For our first 40 years, we've placed heavy emphasis on land preservation. It was important that we protect these lands as they became available, because once they're gone forever. Over the last 2 years, the board has developed a strategic plan that focused on the other 2 legs of our mission, which are environmental restoration and public access. Beginning of 2013, we began a public process to develop a division for the develop a vision for the district for the next 40 years. We had a very comprehensive public engagement process to really understand what the public wanted for these open space lands. The staff convened a community advisory committee of experts, community leaders, user groups, and neighbors. We talked to over 2,000 people through in-person interviews, focus groups, an interactive website, and 5 public workshops. And we heard loud and clear that the public wants more access to these lands. Public wants to protect local redwood forests and bayland areas, continue preserving open space lands and recognizing that these lands provide clean air and water, and to restore and care for lands to create healthy habitat for wildlife and preserve biodiversity. We also did some scientific telephone polls to further test how the public perceives the work the district does. And the results confirmed what we learned at these public meetings and through the interactive website. The results are very encouraging. 95% of the folks said local open space preserved quality of life. 95% said that they are valuable public resources. 89% say that they contribute to health and wellness, and so forth. But the public who were polled said the same things that the public who attended our meetings. From these meetings, we developed a slate of 54 high-priority project areas throughout the district. And of these 54, we selected 25 project areas. And in your handouts, you'll see a better map. I know that's very hard for you to see and for the audience to see. But those 25 project areas, again, were determined through this public process. And our staff then made a cost estimate of what it would take to implement these 25 projects. That was $300 million. So near San Carlos, there are a number of fabulous projects, starting with Miramontes Ridge, which is really the gateway to the San Mateo coast. We also want to partner to complete some gaps in the Bay Trail along the shore and collaborate to preserve additional bayfront open spaces as available. Funding from a future bond measure will go towards additional redwood and watershed protection and completion of the Purisima to the Sea Trail. We'll create more single-use biking and hiking trails and preserve additional open space at El Corte de Mar Creek. We'd also like to begin to open the La Honda Creek Preserve very soon with additional funds. All of these projects in that 25 include habitat restoration, which again helps with clean air and water, improves trails, and adds more acreage at our most popular preserves. Now that we have this great list of 25 high-priority projects, our board voted on February 26 to move forward with the bond measure, Measure AA, to help fund these projects, and starting immediately and continuing over the next 20 to 30 years. The board voted to place this $300 million general obligation bond on the June 3rd ballot. We wanted to make this bond available, so the tax rate will start out at about $1 per 100 of assessed value. Over the course of time, it will not exceed $3.18 per 100,000 of assessed value. The bonds will be sold over a 20 to 30 year time period and can only be used on capital projects such as land acquisition, improving access such as trails and parking areas, and on restoration projects. You may not know that the district has functioned on its original property tax instrument for the last 41 years. We have not come back to the voters in 41 years. But as you know, a 2/3 majority will be required to pass this bond act. The ballot measure includes special requirements for citizen oversight and annual reporting of the money we'd collect and spend. Thank you for your time and attention. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Cecily. Questions? Matt?
I have a few. I haven't sitting here listening to you and reading this at the same time, I haven't been able to get through all 25 points.
Okay.
But something that I do see repeated a couple of times is a conservation grazing project. Can you explain what that is?
Well, sure. One of the growing habitat conservation projects is using grazing. You know, it used to not be used as a good conservation practice, but grazing does a number of things. It keeps down, you know, it reduces fuel, which is what has caused a lot of wildfires in our area. It also supports the quality of life on the coast, which is something that, you know, our neighbors out from Half Moon Bay down to Pescadero have requested. Many of these lands have been grazed for many years, some being grazed just before acquisition by the Open Space District.
And there's another couple of times in here it talks about, it seems to be a key highlight, you mentioned maintaining agriculture on the coast. Can you explain how this maintains agriculture on the coast?
Well, sure. On coastal San Mateo County, there is a lot of production still in cut flowers, a number of row crops on the coast. And some of the lands we purchase are in production, or there's a desire for there to be production on the coast. Some of these lands are zoned agricultural. So when we acquire lands on the coast, we work with the Farm Bureau, we work with the County Agricultural Committee in order to make decisions about future land use.
So it's no longer under private ownership. What is it leased back to? Or,
That is correct.
okay. And the impact when you buy a property, I know recently you bought Driscoll Ranch, or it was bought through
That's correct.
Post bought it, and then you guys
Right.
bought it.
It's part of Lander Creek, yes.
And by the way, one of the things I used to enjoy doing with my family was going to the rodeo that was held at Driscoll Ranch, and ever since it was purchased, no rodeo. Great family event. We stayed there one night till about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, sitting around a campfire and singing songs, and
Right.
just had a grand old time.
And I would like to encourage you, though, Post has acquired the Event Center property, and we have entered into a 2-year use and management agreement of the Event Center property. So there's several parcels, and one includes an underpass there that would allow you know, these farmers to either pick up or drop off cattle. They'd pass under the road to Driscoll Ranch.
So they may bring back the rodeo?
Quite possibly. There have been a number of public meetings discussing uses. In addition to a rodeo, there was a lot of search and rescue.
Yeah, there was training that went on there as well.
Absolutely.
That's
A
right.
lot of training by the sheriff, by E-Track, the various equestrian groups that help with search and rescue. So it's a multiple-use property.
And there was, I guess that was it. Those are the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Cameron?
Hi, Cecily. Just
Hi.
a quick comment. I want to say that I'm very pleased that Ms. Penn is going out and asking voters for some additional capital. I think, you know, we live in one of the most environmentally, ecologically beautiful places on the face of the earth from my perspective. And I think the thing that's great about this is that it simultaneously protects land, but it also provides public access, which I think is critical, and it allows, you know, the next generation to learn about, you know, the importance of the land and the legacy of the land that we have here, and it gives the public just access to just beautiful outdoor space. So I just want to say thanks and appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions?
Just one. Sure. Thanks, Cecily. Great presentation. Just one question I had. Does the Open Space District have any particular lands that they've got their eye on that they maybe like to acquire?
Of
Or
course.
is it a secret?
Well, it is a secret because
Are you
if
going
there
to
is
take an option on it or something?
Want to sell your house, Ron? Or?
There certainly is, and we work with other agencies in the county, such as county parks, national parks, and state parks to develop wildlife corridors, Like Persimmon C, we've been working with Post for many years to acquire the lands so that there could be a trail eventually.
Okay.
So we definitely have a list, and some of these properties, there have been conversations with the landowners over the years. In some cases, we have right of first offer on them. But we don't have money to buy many of these properties right now, so.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecily. My only comment is that I'm just sorry you told everybody about that dog park, because I have enough problems parking over there as it is. No, I'm just kidding. That is a wonderful, not just for people who want to walk their dogs, but just want to do some hiking on a casual basis. The Polga's open space area is a phenomenal asset, and more of those would be nice. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecily.
And Mr. Mayor, if
Yes.
I may, I appreciate her presentation. I wonder if the council would be interested in hearing perhaps the flip side of the coin on what it means to have such an agency buying up large acreages of land, and perhaps what the other options are with, this much land going into the public trough, if you will.
Yeah, as you and I talked, we had our little sidebar before. I don't want to have. Oftentimes, issues have multiple sides.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I personally have no problem with and would support if somebody wants to come in to talk to us about exactly that kind of thing. Just have them get in touch with me or
Very good.
with Jeff.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. We will now move on to public comment. I have one public comment card here. If there's anybody else who would like to speak to the council on a topic that's not on the agenda, you can speak to us on topics that are on the agenda also, but we just have you do that when we get to that topic. This is the period of time for when you want to address us on something that's not on the agenda. Please feel free to fill out one of these cards and turn it into Crystal. The one card I have is from Bob Black.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Tonight's a special night, other than it is the beginning of Passover, but also it is a very special night in that we're having an astronomical delight. There will be a total eclipse of the moon, and it will begin around 11 p.m., and it will be total from about midnight to about 1:30. Now, I would recommend everybody to look outside. Be sure you wake up and look outside and see the moon. It will be a delight. It will be most likely a rusty red and dim, and it will be flanked on the left by Saturn and on the right by Mars. So, and there will be a gathering up at Vista Park, and so if you're so inclined, come on up to Vista Park and join with the rest of the people who want to be awed by this event. So be sure you don't miss it. Thank you.
I think
Thank you, Bob.
the council's invited to Bob's house to sit out on the back deck.
Absolutely.
Well, in
Absolutely.
fact, Bob, I was just going to say, I know how you like us to have late meetings. Could you please get us out of here by 11?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say we'll probably be here, Bob, but we'll try to get up there.
All right.
Nothing.
Take a break and look outside.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Bob.
We'll now move on to the approval of the consent calendar. These are items that the council approves en masse without discussion, with the caveat that council members may ask to have one or more items removed and addressed in a normal discussion fashion. Are there any items that my colleagues would like to pull off of the consent calendar? Yes, Matt.
3 in a row, F, G, H.
F, G, and H. Any others?
That's it. I think that's plenty.
Well, there's no quota.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, given that, and that there's no other requests to pull things off, I will entertain a motion to approve items A through E and I through N as in Nancy.
So moved. Second.
Can you do that? I guess you used to be the mayor. Of course you could do that.
You can.
Just, you gave a perfect
Yeah,
description.
fine. All right, there we go. Call the roll, please, Crystal.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right, we will deal with items F, G, and H later in the meeting. That brings us to item 9, unfinished business. Consideration of adopting a resolution approving the council chamber ADA compliance project C9802 final construction documents appropriating $687,215 from the Capital Projects Fund 0025 to the project, authorizing the advertisement for bids, authorizing the expenditure of a construction budget with contingencies, and executing a construction contract with the lowest responsive and responsible bidder if the bid is within the construction budget. Matt.
Yes, sounds like a mouthful. But we have a short presentation for you guys tonight. I have Rob Wood with Nichols Booth Architecture, and the project is at a point where it's ready for advertisement. So we decided that it would be a perfect time for the architect to come up and show the council the finishes, the finished product, and some renderings of what the council chamber would look like. The architect has worked with staff and the subcommittee in determining the finishes that are on board right now. Currently, the project is on schedule, and with approval tonight, the project will be able to start construction during the council recess. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rob Wood with Nichols Booth.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Hello, Rob.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As Matt indicated, we've been working diligently since meeting with you last time, both with staff and with Mr. Grocott and Mr. Gracili, to further develop the design and produce the bid and permit documents for the council chambers. To quickly kind of touch base on the overall goals were clearly identified earlier in the process, looking for a modernized and updated facility, incorporating new audiovisual and finishes, and addressing overall acoustic and lighting issues. Given the fact that we do have a targeted budget, our approach has been to identify a series of alternate pricing elements within the bid documents, targeting these as kind of a silver, gold, and a platinum level. The silver would be essentially the base bid, with gold elements including some alternate elements such as upgraded ceiling package finishes, as well as additional lighting elements and some upgraded finishes within the space. And a platinum level incorporating a direct view video screen, a full additional acoustic elements within the space, and then the highest level of audiovisual equipment available based on the conversations with staff to date. The proposed plan, which you've seen previously, has not changed substantially, but essentially we're looking at incorporating a new dais. You will see some images in a moment that give a little bit better visual presentation in a 3D format, but essentially taking the corner of the space that you're currently in, shifting the dais slightly to the right so that actually the council members would be located essentially directly underneath where the clock is right now, shifting staff to be seated where you are, Mr. Mayor, and incorporating the public seating in the space in front of that to the back of the room where the current entry point is to the space. The element that you see on the right is a section through the space where you can see that the dashed line is representative of the existing ceiling. We are proposing to bring the ceiling down substantially in the space, give it a little bit more intimate feel, and again, you'll see an image on how we would do that. The ceiling in the space would incorporate a perimeter soffit that would be a drywall construction with a lofted element in the space that would also incorporate acoustic elements, an acoustic tile ceiling, some suspended pendant fixtures and perimeter lighting, as well as downlights and integrated speakers into the ceiling system throughout the space. This is an image representative of looking at the space from as if you were entering from the doors. So as entering in the doors and then looking at this back wall here to my right where the existing clock is, gives you a representative image of what the silver level would look like, incorporating basic acoustic elements within the space, a new finish palette of carpet tile, a soft-toned paint scheme, and integrated lighting within the space, as well as a proposed new seal behind the dais. Also incorporated would be new movable, stackable, and gangable seating that would be allow flexibility within space for future uses, as well as adding additional chairs down the central aisle if needed for larger events or council sessions. This is an image now showing how the projection screen would be dropping from the ceiling behind the council members over the seal at the times at which presentations would be required. The council members themselves would actually have small monitors located in front of them, shared by each of you for direct viewing by yourself so that you're not turning around to try and see what the presentation incorporates. In addition, you'll also see that there's some additional lighting that we would be proposing along the perimeter of the space that would actually wash the walls with light and add another layer and level of lighting complexity and interest to the space. The last element, a platinum level, this gives a representation of what the space would look like using a large direct view monitor that would be located behind the council members in lieu of a projected screen. This is a cost upgrade and would be included in the documents as an add alternate pricing to see if this could come in within the budget. In addition, what you're not seeing here, but you will see in the next image, is some additional acoustic material within the back room. This is an image actually looking back into the room from the location of the existing emergency exit door. You can see here that the existing door, if you look at it carefully, actually has a break between the third and the fourth tiles above it. You can see here that essentially, if you look at that door now, the proposed elevation of the ceiling would actually be right where the door opening, top of the door opening is. This would bring the scale of the room down. The perimeter of the space would simply be painted. The existing finished materials on the perimeter, the tongue and groove boards would remain for cost savings, but would be refinished in a new paint color scheme. The finishes were reviewed and options selected by Mr. Grocott and Mr. Gracili. They are currently proposed to incorporate essentially just wall paint, new carpet throughout the space with primarily an open area that would then also be identified through the circulation with a contrasting carpet, and a Zurel type material, which is a very durable synthetic fabric material that's highly abrasion resistant, but also acoustically transparent, that would provide some acoustic remediation within the space.
I think you said you guys were going to go with pink.
Yeah. She's going to be here for the first night.
And here you see a render plan looking down upon the space, showing kind of the layout of the chairs, the dais, the staff seating, and the podium location in the center of the space to address the city council members. You also can see here a little bit better the proposed circulation path with the contrasting carpet along the perimeter and down the central aisle. And lastly, we are looking at a chair that we reviewed a number of options with Mr. Grocott and Mr. Gracili. This chair is currently the front runner in that it both incorporates the ganging function so that the staff can actually gang the chairs so that they can't be easily moved without the assistance of the facilities crew, as well as a cushion on the seat, and then also the option of a tablet arm, which there is currently discussion about potentially offering in the front row of the public seating area. New lighting, this is the proposed light fixture, would be a pendant style light fixture. And then lastly, the HD high definition projection screen as part of the base package with a very pencil thin line rear projection or direct projection screen as the add alternate. And we currently have our bid set package that is been in preparation and is, from my understanding from Matt, would be available to you for viewing at the Public Works Department.
Thank you, Rob. Questions for Rob or Matt? I I had a couple, but
I
please.
just wanted to confirm on the seating. There's, I was just doing a quick count. Looks like there's 98. We have 98 fixed seats now. So we would be going up to, it said, I saw two numbers, 107 and 119.
Correct. The 119 is if you add the additional chairs down that proposed central aisleway. So that would allow for the increase of the seating area. We would propose that central aisle be utilized during most of the events, but if necessary, additional seating could be incorporated in that area.
And fire marshal have a problem with filling the seats in the middle?
No, there's no code issues. We have sufficient code width.
All right. Thank you.
Other questions, Matt?
Not questions, I have a comment for later on.
Oh, okay. Cameron, did you have? I had a few. Actually, Bob, did you?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. One question I have is I was curious, given some of the commentary and other reports, Matt, this may be a question for you, about the current environment where construction costs are climbing quite rapidly. How reflective do we think the budget number here is of what the actual current cost to do something like this would be?
So it is true that the economic climate is allowing for higher construction prices. What we have been doing on every step of the way is Rob has been working with a contractor to kind of determine the prices of the additive alternates that we are putting in there to further refine the price. Most of usually with that, they're just estimates. We won't know the real price until we actually get the bid results in, but we have been taking every effort we can to ensure that it's under budget. And that's why Rob has so wisely moved to different packages as add alternates, because as he stated before, it's a lot easier to add stuff in if the price is cheap rather than have a high bid and then try to cut stuff out.
Cut stuff out. No, that makes sense. Thank you. The one comment I had just about one thing you said, Rob, that caught my eye. You talked about up on the dais, council members would have a monitor of some kind built in.
Yes, sir.
Was thought given to whether or not the iPads that we're using could substitute for that? And it's not because I'm in love with the iPad. It's just I'm trying to visualize sort of the hardware of having a screen, and then I have my iPad for.
My understanding is that at this point, the technology that's being incorporated or planned for to try and utilize your existing infrastructure as much as possible would require a dedicated monitor. In order to kind of minimize the cost, we are proposing that those monitors be shared by two individuals, so the monitor would actually be located between two of the individuals.
Okay.
The space in front of you would then be available, and we're actually incorporating connection technology to allow individual laptop connections as well as power and data above the work surface that could be easily accessed by the staff and by council members.
Okay, thank you. And last question, and this may be a Matt question as well, but we did get, I hope we all got in the dais, I know I did, an email this afternoon from a gentleman who was concerned about the magnitude of the architect's fees. What's typical percentage-wise on a project of this size for architectural fees? Because I have to admit, when I looked at it, and I have no idea, this is the first major project like this of this kind that I've been involved with, but relative to me building my house, the architectural fees here are higher proportionally to the total cost.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely ranges anywhere between 20 to 30% at times. The architectural fees can be higher, ranging on kind of the level of effort and the amount of stakeholder involvement that is involved in the process. We did do a back check as we went through and selected the architect for this project, and they were, out of the top candidates, they were somewhere within the mid-range, low to mid-range in terms of fees. The challenge with these professional services contracts is that they're not low bids, so we can't effectively just go select the low bid person. The way we've actually are slated to select proposals are based on qualifications of the project. And so, if we deem that the price is too high, we do go and negotiate with the architect to try to cut scope or lower fees at every turn possible. And I'm pretty sure Rob can attest that the city is very holds on to their money really tightly, and so we try not to just lavishly spend on items that we feel is not necessary.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. So, discussion. We have no public comment on this unless somebody wishes to fill out a card.
We need a motion for discussion? Or?
You are absolutely right, Cameron. Thank you. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Nobody's going to step up. I'll make a motion. Make a motion to adopt the resolution number 35. Wow. 2014-35, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving the Council Chamber ADA Compliance Project C9802 final construction documents, appropriating $687,215 from the Capital Projects Fund 0025 to the project, authorizing the advertisement for bids, authorizing the expenditure of a construction budget with contingencies and executing a construction contract with the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, if the bid is within the construction budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second, so now we can discuss. Yes.
So I have a couple questions for my colleagues because this project was authorized, I think, before I joined the council, and so I'd be interested if you'd indulge me with a little bit of background. It doesnit really sit that well with me to spend close to $1 million on the council chamber, and that's just how I sort of come to this project. I think I think it'll be $800,000 when it's all said and done. $800,000 can do a lot of good in the community. It can fix a lot of streets. It can upgrade a park, et cetera. And I think my question is, if there's some minimum things that had to be done for ADA compliance, et cetera, did you look at those, and what's sort of the minimum versus the full package?
If, and without inhibiting anybody else on the dais from responding, I think I'd actually like to have staff respond to that just initially,
sure.
At least.
We'll have our city engineer kind of provide some of the numbers on that, but just by way of background, if you want to conceptually talk about the major elements of the project that brought the project forward, you're really talking about the entire dais, the staff area, because they're not ADA compliant. So, if we were to have a council member with a disability, we don't have the dais capacity to deal with that in the rim. So you're talking about demolishing all this, as well as a significant cost of reworking the ceiling, because the second component of the project that we were trying to accomplish isn't so much ADA, but it's the creation of a fire suppression system in this room. We've just completed the rest of the first floor, which did not have a fire suppression system, but you'll notice that this room does not, which is a large assembly area. So with that, I'll turn it over to the city attorney to get into a little bit more detail. Our city engineer.
Yeah, so this conversation came up at the beginning of the design development of the project itself. The project team was very conscious in not overspending for specific elements. If you break the project down itself into what's actually being replaced, it's essentially the dais and the seating and the carpet, and probably putting in a roof system. The walls themselves will not be demolished. They're only just going to be painted over. It's just unfortunate the $800,000 does sound like a large amount, but that's essentially just the cost of business of working on a public project that has to go out through the public bid process.
Are there others that wanted to provide some additional background on that?
On the cost?
No, on Cameron's question. He was asking initially to his colleagues who have been here longer if they wanted to.
Yeah, I'll say something about that, because I would be concerned too about spending too much money on a project, and I do look at the figure as being pretty high. In my industry, you could do 2 home remodels for that amount of money. You could add on to somebody's house in second-story addition, 2 of them. But I think that's why we put it out to bid. Hopefully, it comes in somewhat lower, or right around where we're estimating. And I think these guys do a good job of, estimating. But just in terms of the need, and the city manager spoke to the need from his perspective, and Matt has talked about, how the engineering department saw it. for myself, just sitting on this dais for 13 years as I have, while I understand the concern of spending $800,000, we're in a situation, and you mentioned some other things that we could do with the money, but the difference is here, it's impossible to get a grant of any kind to help us with the project. Whereas parks, roads, those kinds of things, we can go out and get grant money for those kinds of things. When you look at this facility, in this room, it's in dire need of something. And, this is essentially the people's house for San Carlos. It's our gathering space for these kinds of meetings, and it is tired and is in much need of an upgrade. So I personally don't have a problem with spending some money, and hopefully the price tag comes in to something that's acceptable.
I think I would follow up on that, just the fact of the ADA is the first thing. And once you start that, then you're basically putting as they said in a lot of things, a lipstick on a pig. If you look at these chairs, and I've sat in a lot of those chairs in previous years when I wasn't on the council, how old is this building now?
Nearly 50 years.
No, it's not.
40
About 40 plus.
40 some odd
And
years old.
if these aren't the original chairs, they're close.
There's almost everything in here is
It's original, except for the carpet isn't, I don't
The
think.
carpet was done one time.
But the chairs have been in here, well, certainly all the time that I've been in town, I think, which is 30 years.
Yeah.
So I think it's just that when you start a construction project, you can do it piecemeal, and it's going to cost you, as Matt would attest, it's going to cost you a lot more to do it. And I agree with you, it's a lot of money, but as Matt indicated, this is a facility that is basically the face of San Carlos. I mean, we're out.
And I'd just like to make one comment on that, which is that I agree with that, but in many ways it's a symbol more than the actuality, which is that people, the way they access government these days is increasingly over the internet, through technology and other things. And with, several $100,000 put towards technology, we could reach a lot more people, I think, than changing the configuration of the room.
Would that mean I get to sit in my house and you could I don't have to come down here?
I'm working on
Because
that.
I'm all for that. But, I mean, I know where you're going. I mean, you're in a different thing than I am. So I'd rather face somebody standing there talking to me, yelling at me, or doing whatever than have them punching in a number or sending me a blog or sending me something else.
Right. Well, I mean, we could, do amazing things to this room. That doesn't mean that more people are going to be able to access their government. We can, go out and reach people where they are, and we might be able to connect more to residents. And I just think that, given the recent fiscal problems that the city has had, we need to set an example of frugality. And if we just look at the slide that's on the screen, I mean, I think we should absolutely not buy an HD, video screen for the chamber. It doesn't make any sense. We don't need it. I can read the projection screen as it is. And I'm just concerned about spending excess money because it's a nice to have. I would just prefer that we focus on the need to have.
The only thing I can mention is that Mr. Grocott and I are pretty conservative when it comes to, especially him, and I'm following him along in my background, and we certainly don't necessarily want the platinum per se, unless it was like $200,000 with the platinum, then we'll take it. But I think when you come back with the contract, we'll be able to pick and choose, and if it's less than $687, I'm sure we'll be happy to do it as long as it's functional and able to accomplish what we need to do. I'm not one for bitten fancy smancy. I'd rather just make sure it's efficient and does the job. So.
I was just going to say that I couldn't say it better than the two of you did, which is why I was looking for the two of you to say something. I too want us to be efficient in our use of resources. To me, it's a value proposition, and if nothing else, I joke about it, but I don't like having to remind folks that are coming down to see us in chambers or want to speak and waiting for us. I always tell them, don't sit in the first row because the seats are totally worn out, and it might actually be painful. That's why we have staff sit there. I don't remember which one of my colleagues used the term. It is the people's house. I don't think that this level of expenditure, particularly if we're careful about what we choose to do, spent once every 40 years is out of line with what the people's expectation is.
Well, I'll weigh in. What it came down to for me was the fact that the first thing was the ADA compliance, which I think Bob mentioned, but I believe there are some energy savings to be had in terms of the remodel. Is that right? Mr.
Yes,
Lee?
as part of it, we are looking at installing energy-efficient lighting and other matters, and looking at the HVAC to make
So
it
we're going
run
to be
more
saving
efficiently.
energy. All right.
Yes.
The other thing is, what's the cost of waiting? I mean, it has been, I think this building was done in the mid to late 60s. So we're pushing 50 years. So the cost of waiting, do we wait another 2 years, 5 years? What is the cost then? Also, I believe the city's been sort of saving up for this. It's been in the budget for a long time. We're doing better financially. It's not like we're going, into the red to do this. We're not raising anybody's taxes. We're not passing a bond measure. And as I've been around the peninsula, and I've been in other council chambers, many of them are much more opulent than the plans for this. I think this is rather modest. I'm not an expert obviously in the cost of this remodel, but it seems quite reasonable to me. And maybe we don't do an HDTV, but I do believe that it's long overdue.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please, Matt.
I have a question for my colleagues. The other night, my wife and I and son and my in-law, we were at New Canton Restaurant, and there was a fellow there that had a shirt on that I think it said Inline or something like that, and I asked him about it later. Turns out it's a company that, I hate to say this, used to be in San Carlos and then moved across the border into to Belmont on a harbor. And what they do is they make projector screens, and they have this device that attaches to it. He told me what the price was. I was shocked at how low it was. But the idea is that it's interactive, so you can use your iPhone, your iPad. The staff could do things. And I bring it up because, A, they're they're right next door. This company is local. I think they're the only one that offer this kind of product. But my concern, a little bit opposite the way Mr. Johnson is going, is I don't want to lock us into some older technology that 5-10 years down the road is going to be obsolete. And I'm not so much concerned about, I'm not so interested in HD TV as much as I am having something that's going to stay current longer. And I would be interested if the rest of the council would be interested in something that might have the ability for interactivity when a presentation's being made and you could do things on the screen, whoever's doing the presentation, that sort of thing.
Just speaking for myself, to the extent that fits within, a budgetary framework,
Sure.
I think that's a reasonable thing to think about doing.
I don't think it's in our motion per se. It doesn't have to be, but I
That's
think
a
just
level of detail.
It's a level of detail, but just to make people aware of it.
Other comments or discussion? If not, then we will, I have no public comment cards. Nobody wants to speak on this. Okay. Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes?
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. That brings us to item 10A, consideration of a resolution rejecting all bids received for the Crestview Park renovation project C9336 and directing staff to rebid the project after performing value engineering to reduce scope and costs.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, I need to recuse myself from this item, so I'll be leaving the room.
We will let you know when we're done. For the benefit of the public, the reason that Mr. Grisilli, that Bob has to recuse himself, is he lives within a defined radius of this project, and California law requires that. Good evening, Jay.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and pardon me while I stretch just a little bit from sitting in those chairs in the front row. But much appreciated. The upgrade is an important one for that reason alone, and I know our audience members would feel the same way. So tonight I've got the opportunity to present the Crestview Park renovation project update for you. And as council is aware, this project was approved back in the 2012-14 capital improvement program. And that was essentially made effective in July of 2012. So we're coming up on a couple of years now that we've had this project in development. And as you also will remember, we had 3 community meetings and 2 Parks and Rec Commission meetings where we had lots of good input from stakeholders, community members, residents in the area of Crestview Park, and our elected officials too. And we came to you in August of 2013 for a study session to kind of let you help us sort this all out. And with your direction, we went forward and we completed the design plans for the project in February. And then we went ahead and advertised the project in March. And with a decision to move forward tonight, then we would be looking at still trying to have construction take place this summer. And our schedule has anticipated that the Crestview Park turf play season for the fall of 2014 is really going to be put on hold if the project is under construction, and Parks and Rec has been working to accommodate the users of the fields at that location. So something to let the council know about is, as this project was being ready to go out to bid, staff looked at some ways to save some cost. One of the things that they came up with was that the playground equipment that's to be purchased for the project is being purchased through a government contract. And so we're saving, we're getting it more at a wholesale price, and we're saving a contractor's markup, which amounted to about $23,000 before we even went out to bid. The other thing that staff did was they created a couple of bid alternates, which is discussed in the previous item, allow some flexibility for the project to be still awarded if the bids come in higher than you expect, because you've created some things that can be removed from that award. And in that regard, those items came up to $110,000. We also identified in this project that city staff would do the inspection and the management of this project during construction. And we estimated the cost to hire a construction management firm, full-time inspectors for this project, to be in the range of $120,000. That's, say, sort of in the neighborhood of say 10 to 12% of the project cost. That's kind of a typical cost for that type of work. So before the project even went out to bid, we looked at ways to try to save costs. Well, we did go out to bid, and we found that the low bid came in above the engineer's estimate, and so we're not able to proceed with an award. So we also talked to our design consultant, Callender Associates, about some ways that we could, if the council was able to award the contract, that we would be able to go ahead and maybe negotiate certain items out of the contract in order to keep the cost as low as possible. We identified the restroom upgrades for about $50,000 and a chain link fence for the project, which could be removed but built at a later time when money could be found. They weren't essential, must-have parts of the project right now, but they are important and we want to do them. So we've been busy trying to figure out some ways that we could reduce costs and help council get to a point where we could still award the contract. So tonight, as you know, we're recommending that you reject the bids. And if we reject the bids and we revise the project and we go out to bid again, there's no guarantee that we'll have lower prices. In this area, we typically are we're subject to what other projects are bidding, whether there's similar projects or already a bunch of park projects out there that contractors are very busy. We may not get low prices. But there's always a chance that you'll have a lull in the activity, a hungry contractor or two, and we'll get some good prices. So there is a risk to that, but we can go forward and reject the bids and revise the project in order to set it up so that we can hope to come back with a definite award. One of the things we wanted to make sure we were was respectful of the current budget. We didn't want to just assume that council would decide to give us more money to award the contract. And one of the things in sort of looking at the analysis of this, the slide that's on the screen right now shows the in the second column from the left, at the very bottom you can see that if we were to award the contract for the bid alternate items and the entire contract as proposed, we would need an additional $350,000. And we're clearly not in a position to do that. You move over across, option one was to reject the bids and go out to bid again. We'll see if that works. We could get a lower price. Option two allows for the council to appropriate more money to the contract, and the bottom line for that one is $230,000. And what we would do is we would leave the bid alternatives out of the project, but we'd still go forward with the restroom renovations and the chain link fence. And we feel like that's a really good project to move forward with if the council chooses to do that. The other option 3 on the far right side is one of the ways that we can do this is council could appropriate $230,000 to award the contract, and then when we have that contractor with an agreement in place, we can negotiate some of the scope out of the project. So, for example, those 2 items, the restroom renovation, the chain link fence, we could negotiate with that low bidder after he's under contract and reduce the cost if the council chose to do that. That would essentially kind of net us to where we would only need $141,000 to be able to prosecute the project to its completion. That would be the budget that we would need. So the source, what we also identified for the council is there is a source of funds that could be used to go towards the overrun on this contract. And in the recently completed Burton Park Phase 2 renovation project, we finished with in the vicinity of $215,000 that was under budget from all the work that was performed there. And so that money, of course, it just stays essentially in the general fund, and that money could be appropriated by council if you chose to go forward with the project tonight. So several options for you to consider, and Matt is here, I'm here to answer any questions you might have about this. And so at this point, I'll turn it back to the council for any questions and further direction.
Thank you, Jay. Questions?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused with the checkbook.
I tell you what, Matt, we'll start with you.
All right. If our original budget was $1,760,000, oh, I see, because of the design. So if we take even these figures here, the 14 or 1,441,000, and add in these some of the costs we've already had because of design and so forth, that's what gets us above the 1,700,000. Is that right?
Yes, you are correct. There's also one other item of contingency. We need to ensure that we have enough contingency to go through with construction. The biggest mistake would be to enter into the project without any contingency, and as we're halfway through construction, not have enough money to pay the contractor. So the $230,000 also represents, I think, a healthy 8% contingency.
8%
for the project.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Ron?
I just had one. I'm trying to find where that chain link fence you talked about that would be removed from the project.
Chain link fence location?
Is it
Do we have
the
a picture
perimeter
that
or
shows
what?
that?
The fence enclosure that we're discussing here, I believe this chain link fence is around the playground equipment, the playground area. As part of the design, the architect felt that it was best to try to segregate the little kids from all the other areas of the park so they can't just run off into, say, the basketball courts or out into the parking lot area.
And that's something that doesn't exist in the current configuration of the
Oh,
park.
it does not. So it would be an improvement.
An improvement. Anything else?
Nope, not at the
Cameron,
moment.
do you have any questions?
Just briefly, education for a new council member. So my math says that $230,000 is about a 13% overrun against what was appropriated. How does that jive historically with projects that we've done? Is that?
It's really hard to say that we have a consistent track record of being over or under on these bids.
Yeah.
I guess I would say that I'm not particularly surprised that this was over.
Yeah.
When you're in that range of say 10% or so, I think you've done pretty well as far as the estimates go, because it always is a matter of what's happening with contracting going on at the time and prices and things like that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, I had a few. The leftover funds from the Burton Park project, in my discussions with Christine, I've learned that there appears to be an issue, a drainage issue, I guess, for lack of a better term, with one of the bocce ball courts. Is repairing that contemplated in when we talk about what the leftover funds are? Or basically, are we potentially leaving ourselves with a project that we need to fix, we need to find funding for, if we were to use the funds?
There's a healthy amount remaining in the Burton Park project itself. It has accounted for the additional cost of items that needs to be redone. I'm not sure if the bocce ball courts drainage issue has been accounted in for that, but I can assure you that it's a small amount in context to what's remaining for the Burton Park project.
Okay.
That can be transferred over to this project.
That's fair enough. And again, sort of following up on those leftover Burton Park funds, are they currently earmarked for any other project? In other words, if we were to deploy them against this project, are we cutting funds out of some other project, or are they just currently left over?
They're currently leftover funds. Essentially, we're right at the closeout point of the project. I think we just issued our final retention payment to the contractor, so essentially they would be sitting waiting for reallocation to some other project or back to the Fund 25.
And as we know from one of the other items on the agenda, we certainly have other projects that need some additional funding as well.
That's correct.
But how much, what was that figure again, the leftover amount?
$215,000.
215.
215.
So almost gets us there.
All right. At this point, we have two public speaker cards. I'd like to take the public comment. If council has any other questions, we can return to that. First up is Mr. Ken Lum. Good evening, Ken.
Hi there. My name is Ken Lum, and I'm here on behalf of the amateur astronomers that use the Crestview Park for our star parties. And now that the City Council is considering reconfiguring the bids, and there may be a delay in the initiation of construction at Crestview Park, we have been asked to remove ourselves from Crestview Park, anticipating the construction beginning at the end of last month. And given that delay, we were wondering if it's possible to return to the park and continue our programs until the City Council decided a new timeline for the renovation.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ken. We'll address your question in a second. The second speaker is Bob Daner. Good evening, Bob.
Good evening. I must be lipping because of those seats.
No, you were in the back rows. You're okay.
Lawsuit on our hands eventually.
I'm Bob Daner. I live at 165 Leslie Drive in San Carlos. A couple of comments. I was unable to find the bid specs on the city's website, and I hope that any revised spec for the scope of the project would be posted on the site so that many of those of us that are interested in Crestview Park could view them. My feelings are that any decision to reject any or all of the bids will only delay the Crestview renovation for many months. I would hope that the city could resolve these cost overrun issues by negotiating with the low bidder to do those essential components, which of course we all know: rebuild the fields, install a new children's play area. Perhaps my favorite is install the crushed granite track rather than spend money on a rubberized track. Of course, renovate the restrooms and improve and resurface the parking lot. I feel that most of the other design components are really not needed. For example, the Leslie Drive access, replacing the current concrete pathway with crushed rock and steps that are quite ornamental, is really not necessary. And the fencing around the parking lot is not necessary. And maybe the resurfacing of the basketball courts is not necessary. And maybe changing of the parking lot, those drastic changes, may not be necessary, but definitely better access is needed. But in no case should the city invest money in any further redesign of that park. I will note that in the first community meeting, Calendar's representative said that the original layout of that park was a very good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. No, I was just saying thank you. Sorry. I'd like to ask whoever's appropriate from staff to respond to a couple of the questions that I heard there from the speakers. The first, and I think the simplest one, is the use of the park by the Astronomy Club.
I don't think that there's any reason why they couldn't go back in and use that while there wasn't any active construction taking place.
Okay, good.
So if there was some extended delay, then I don't see that as an issue at all.
Okay, good. And then Bob Daner had pointed out a number of things that he was basically proposing as alternative cost-saving measures, such as the Leslie Drive access and some of the other things. I'd be interested in staff's comments on those, since I presume some of them were probably considered in the review.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Matt can help me here too, but the steps, the pathway steps for Leslie Drive, those were a bid alternate item, and so they could be left out. The surfacing or the colorful surfacing of the basketball court, that could be left out as well. That's the reason why we had those as bid alternates, in case we felt those were things that could potentially be left out without sort of really significantly affecting the renovation of the park.
Oh, I see. So that would be a savings of $110,000.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so the $110,000 is already not included in the base bid. So for the additional funds that we're actually looking for, we're not even asking for that, or sorry, for option 2, that does not even include the additional amounts there.
Correct. Oh, I see, because it says alternatives not selected. You've already wiped those out.
Those have already been wiped out. So some of the other alternatives that have been discussed in terms of the rubberized running track versus decomposed granite, we did look at that as an option. However, the cost savings were minimal, because with the decomposed granite track, you would have to create a concrete header on the end so you can compact the track in that area, whereas with a rubberized track, you don't really need an end surface to abut against, and so the savings were not actually there. Staff and the architect has spent a lot of time trying to see what they could cut out of the project as that was not essential, and I think we've done the best job that we can, given the scope that we were given for this project.
And actually, I'm glad you mentioned that again, because I meant to thank staff before for doing that. That's exactly what you should be doing.
And Mr. Mayor, one last comment, that I think Mr. Daner is correct in assuming that if we have to go back and spend a lot more time on the project to reevaluate what might be taken out of it, that will cost us something from a consultant's time, because the consultant has been very much involved in this thing to get it to this point. So we want to be mindful of that as well.
Fair enough. Any other questions from the dais, or shall we move to discussion? And if so, you have a question?
Yeah, I just have
one.
Just something we could do in parts. I mean, could we break it up into different sectors that maybe we could do it piecemeal, so that when more funds become available, we could finish the project, or does it add to the cost to do it that way?
I think it would add to the cost in the long run. We'll get some economy of scale and cost in terms of the construction of both redoing the playground areas as well as doing the parking lot and the field at the same time, because there's a fair amount of demolition that has to take place. And once you do only one piece, then you'll have to be ever more careful, and it'll be more costly to try to demo something next to something you've just recently rebuilt.
I'd like to just add to that really quick, if I may, Ron. You said if more funding became available, and I just want it to be clear to the council, while the council hasn't appropriated in the budget enough funding to cover these costs, Fund 25, the capital fund, does have the resources to cover even the full $350,000, which represents the full scope of the project as envisioned by the council with all of its alternatives. So it's not a matter of the city having the funding, it's a matter of that funding having been allocated to this project, which is, of course, before you tonight for your consideration.
Right. One other quick question, if I may, because I don't think I've ever used the restrooms at Crestview. What state are they in? Whenever we talk about deferring, updating those, I always kind of cringe.
They're essentially original, and so they do need ADA upgrades, and that's the primary reason for having them included in the project. So it is something which we have other facilities that require ADA upgrades, and we have them on a list. Eventually we want to get to them. And again, this is one of those ones which is convenient because we're doing all the other work at the park to include that too.
Got it. Okay. If there are no further questions, and if we're going to discuss this, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2014-36. A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos appropriating $350,000 to the project budget, authorizing the expenditure of a budget with contingencies in the amount of, and here I'll have to do the math, but it would be, sorry. Anyone want to help me with the math here?
From 230 to 350?
From, it's, sorry, 0.
I can do it.
I was looking at the wrong one.
$2,110,000, authorizing direct purchase of playground equipment from vendors in the not-to-exceed amount of $155,000 and executing construction contract with Suarez and Munoz Construction, Inc. up to the amount of $1,640,492.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Before we go too far, I think I'd like to put a competing motion on the table. So I would like to move that we adopt a resolution. I'm just reading from alternative 3. So adopt a resolution appropriating $230,000 to the project budget, negotiating construction contract with Suarez and Munoz Construction after performing value engineering to reduce scope and cost to no more than $1.441292 million, and authorizing direct purchase of playground equipment from vendors in the not-to-exceed amount of $155,000.
And just for my edification, that's essentially option 3, is that correct?
Option 3 is what that is, yes.
Well, I will second that. So I believe the way the rules are, and Greg is going to correct me if I'm wrong, is the second motion gets addressed first. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, I mean, we're going to have a discussion, but when we come to vote on it, that's the sequence we'll go through. So, discussion.
Well, you guys have the motion on the floor, so.
Yeah. I'm just looking for, I would like to see some cost savings, and I do think there's some items in there that are superfluous. For instance, the chain link fence, which isn't there now. And, you know, my son Daniel and I have been up to that park a number of times since discovering it, because it's just beautiful, the views and everything else up there. And I've never seen it be a problem where little kids are running from the existing playground area over into the basketball courts or anything else. So I just don't see it as being an issue. And that's why I like option 3, is because it does give us some savings, and yet it allows the project to go forward. The last thing I want to see us do is go out for another bid, because I just think it mucks up the process, slows us down.
Clarification question to Jeff, probably. None of the options per se speak about whether we redeploy money from Burton Park. In effect, I suppose that's irrelevant in the sense that if we approve a resolution to spend a certain amount of money, money has to come from someplace, and staff will simply budget that.
That's correct. That money is, the Burton Park money is Fund 25 money. It gets redeployed into Fund 25, which is what the money would flow out for this project. So it's kind of 6 to 1. I think we were using that as an example to show you where there's some savings even within Fund 25.
Then the reason I asked for the clarification, the only thing I would add on to Matt's comments, which I support, is that in my mind, 230, 215, we're sort of close there. And I'm not doing as, admittedly, another $120,000 isn't that much damage to a multi-million-dollar capital budget, but I'm doing less damage to it that way.
Yeah, well, I actually seconded your motion because I was afraid that there would be another alternative, but I think I like Matt's better, no offense intended.
None taken.
But I was thinking that the fences, the chain link fence is a nice to have, not a have to have. It's something that can go. And I trust that if there's a $15,000 difference that staff can negotiate with the whoever the winning bidder is, or just find the cost savings in other ways to get there. So I'm inclined to support the second motion.
And just for clarification, the second motion is option 3 up there?
That is correct. Yes, option 3.
So, I mean, my view of it, in contrast to the earlier conversation we had about renovation of the council chambers, I think money spent on parks is money well spent, and it generates a lot of public value. If we're going to go and spend multi-million dollars on Crestview Park, we're probably not going to touch the park for many decades to come. Let's resurface the basketball courts. Let's do it right. And that's my view of it. That's why I think that we should support, kind of the best and fullest version of the project that's out there, and that's why I made the motion that I did. I think, so in option 3, we're not renovating the restrooms, we're not resurfacing the basketball courts, we're not doing the chain link fence, we're not putting in the steps. I think that'd be unfortunate, given that park is so beloved by the community and so frequently used, and so I'd like to see us do as much as we can.
One other observation about my own thinking I forgot to mention a minute ago, and this is purely perhaps taking counsel from fears, but I worry a little bit about whether there will be some cost overruns that we will encounter here.
Sure.
Granted, I think the situation is totally different than digging up Old County Road, where we don't have maps of what's under there.
Right.
But given that recent experience, that's part of the reason I'd also like to have a little slack. And personally, if it comes in on budget, I'd probably be quick to support at least changing the restrooms, fairly quickly. Okay. So for what that's worth. Jay, I think you wanted to add something to this.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, if the council moves forward with option 3 and you appropriate the $230,000 to allow us to award the contract, that's the key thing here, then we can go to the contractor and begin to negotiate cost savings and potentially some scope items out of that. But we can, if you choose to direct us, leave the restroom upgrade in there and find some other things to take out.
I think that's
so the key is with option 3, you would be appropriating the $230,000, which allows us to award the contract at his current bid. Then we can work with him and negotiate scope changes.
Well, I like that even better. I don't know about anybody else.
Which is what the language is in there.
Yeah, you're right. It is. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. Any further discussion?
Just one parliamentary question, Mr. City Attorney. So if this countervailing motion passes, then that's it. There's just one vote. Is that right? Okay.
All right. Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. Now, Jeff, I have to ask you, is this what you expected us to do? You don't have to answer that.
I've had a feeling the council would appropriate additional funding for the project. It's an important project, and you've already invested quite a bit of money in it. And I think, as the entire council pointed out, relative to the overall cost of the project, the additional funding that you're putting in is relatively small.
Fair enough. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. So if somebody would please invite our colleague Bob back in.
Do we have to?
Oh, do we?
What did he say?
He said, do we have to?
We don't know what happened. He went home.
Upstairs?
Does the council want to take a brief recess for some reason?
I wouldn't mind.
All right, we will take a 5-minute recess. We'll be back here at 10 of.
Yeah. Ice cream? Yeah, it was cool. I got to enjoy myself. All right, so B, C, D, and then public hearing. And
Let's talk about some trees.
then
I think we should make electric trees. All right, we will reconvene. And Bob, I just wanted you to know that we took a vote about whether we were actually going to invite you back, and it passed 3-1.
thanks so much.
You're welcome. So we will turn now to item 10B, consideration of authorizing the mayor to send a comment letter from the city of San Carlos regarding the draft environmental impact report for the Caltrain Peninsula Corridor Electrification Project. Jay.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Jay Walter, Public Works Director, here tonight to introduce this item. Tonight we have some Caltrain staff with us that will be making a presentation on the project. Marion Lee, the Executive Officer of the Modernization Project, Casey Fromson from the Caltrain staff, and as well as their consultant, Rich Walter, no relation, who has been working on the project. And they've reached a major milestone to release this draft EIR, and it represents a significant point in the project. So I will ask Caltrain staff to come up and take over the presentation. Once they're complete and you've had an opportunity to ask your questions, then we do want to come back up and have the opportunity to hear from you. What, if anything else, would you like to see in the draft comment letter that we will be sending to Caltrain by the April 29th deadline? So
Fair
with
enough.
that, Marion?
Oh, do I click with this?
Just use the
Okay,
mouse.
Great.
and left.
Good evening. My name is Marion Lee from Caltrain. Thank you very much for agendizing us. We're actually right in the middle of collecting comments on the draft environmental document, and it's requested by various cities along the corridor. We've been making presentations, and we're hoping that this helps the cities and the public commenting on our draft environmental document. I will be co-presenting with Rich Walters from ICF, who's the program manager for the environmental document. So I'll do a quick couple of slides on providing some context, and then Rich Walters will do most of the presentation. So Caltrain has been working on what is called the Caltrain Modernization Program, and that program is approximately $1.5 billion. It essentially has two components in the program. The first component is called the CBOS PTC. It's a long acronym for what is an advanced signal system. That project cost is about $231 million. That signal project is very important because it includes positive train control, which is a federally mandated system for properties like ours. As you know, there have been several properties within the states and outside of the country that have experienced train collisions and train derailments. This advanced signal system would prevent that from happening by overriding human error. The other component to the advanced signal system is it's going to allow us to run our trains closer together, and that'll help us increase capacity in our corridor, allowing us to run more trains, supporting more riders to accommodate the growing demand that we're experiencing today and that we anticipate in the future. The other component of the early investment program is what we call the Peninsula Corridor Electrification Project, and that is the environmental document that we'll be talking about today. It essentially calls for converting our diesel system into a 25 kV electrified system from San Francisco to Tainan, which is one station south of Diridon. The other component to this program includes ongoing workings with the High Speed Rail Authority. They are a partner in this. They're funding approximately half of the $1.5 billion program. Their interest in this program is in the 25 kV system. It's the same electrified system that they will need to support their trains as they approach downtown San Francisco, which is the legally required northern terminus for their statewide system. In terms of our Caltrain project history, we have been trying to electrify our system for a very long time, way before I got here. And it's my understanding that really the founders of the Joint Powers Authority that runs Caltrain had been envisioning this ever since they formed the Joint Powers Board. It was first documented in a strategic plan that was dated in 1999, and then it was confirmed again in 2004. We developed conceptual design, about 10 to 15% engineering drawings in 2002, and based on that, we had attempted to environmentally clear that project. In 2004, we completed what was a draft environmental assessment, environmental impact report, which is a combined state-federal document. A few years after that, we completed 35% design, and by 2019, we had finalized that EA-EIR. At that time, we did achieve a significant milestone from the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration. We received a FONSI, which is a finding of no significant impact. They essentially found that our project had a environmental benefit to the region and locally. There are localized impacts, but that they found that there was no significant impact at the higher level. We attempted to state clear the state portion of that environmental document. The JPB decided to postpone that action given the unknowns with the High-Speed Rail Authority at that time. This is what brings us to today. As you can see, that state document was in 2009. It is now 2014. It's been a couple of years. There was an interest in updating many of the analysis that were done in that older document. It is for that reason that we have a new environmental document today. It is a state-only document. It is not combined with federal. These are the key delivery milestones that the JPB has committed to our stakeholders. Our goal is to have electrified Caltrain service in 2019. You will see that all of the key milestones and the milestone dates work back from that revenue service target date. Today we're in environmental clearance, which started in early 2013. It's approximately a 2-year process. We're right in the middle of it, and we're hoping to finalize it by the end of this year. Soon following environmental clearance, we will enter into a procurement process with potential design builders for the electrified system, as well as the design and the manufacturing of our electric multiple units. And following that, it leaves about a 4-year time frame to build, to commission, to test, and provide revenue service. So with that, I'm going to invite up Rich Walters, and he'll do the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Good evening.
Hello, Rich.
I'm going to move through this very quickly in the interest of time, since you have a full agenda. So, but there will obviously be time if you have questions afterward. Secret requirements, you obviously are all briefed on those. Identify environmental baseline, look at direct, indirect, cumulative impacts. Use significance criteria to find out what's significant and what's not. Identify mitigation if it's significant. Consider alternatives. And often we use a reasonable worst-case approach as a conservative approach to disclosing impacts. I'll point out a few instances of that in the presentation to follow. Project purpose and need is to improve Caltrain system performance, increase service ridership, revenue, increase revenue, reduce cost, reduce environmental impacts associated with train engine noise, as well as air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, and to provide electrical infrastructure that is compatible with later use by high-speed rail. This is the project in green that we are analyzing in the EIR. The project area is about 51 miles and change between the 4th and King Station in San Francisco and about 2 miles south of Tamiyan Station in San Jose. Electrification infrastructure includes an overhead contact system. We call that the OCS. That is poles and wires to carry electricity. And traction power facilities, which include substations and smaller facilities that draw power from PG&E and then communicate it along the line. We also include purchase of rolling stock, which is electric multiple units. These can be individually powered cars, or they can be combined with unpowered cars as well, that would then provide the electrified service. We're studying speeds up to 79 miles per hour. This is the current maximum speed along the system at present.
The speed is actually not determined by the train, it's determined by the condition of the track and what is safe for operation on that track. So we're not changing the top speeds with this project. We are including more service. At present, there's about 5 trains per peak hour per direction. We're going to 6, 12 in both directions. Over the day, we would increase service between San Jose and San Francisco from 92 trains per day to 112. Is that right? Yeah, 114, sorry. And we would restore service to Atherton and the Broadway station in Burlingame. With the funding that we have available, it's not quite enough to entirely run an electrified fleet. We would run a mixed diesel and EMU fleet. About 75% of the trains between San Jose and San Francisco would be EMUs. We'll continue Caltrain service to Gilroy using diesel locomotives, and we'll have continued tenant service. That's ACE, Capital Corridor, Amtrak, and freight. Up here, it's only freight. You don't have the other passenger services. The analysis is based on a prototypical schedule. It's not the actual proposed schedule, but it's considered a representative schedule of what may occur with the project. So a couple visual simulations you may have seen before. These are based on some existing EMU designs that are in use in the world. Basically, the individual units, they have a pantograph that reaches up above the cab and contacts the wires, which are directly over the tracks, and there are poles that then hold those wires in place. There will be a need for some right-of-way. Most of the facilities can fit in Caltrain's right-of-way. The 2 largest facilities we have are 2 substations. One would be in South San Francisco, one would be in San Jose. They each need about 3/4 of an acre. So they're located near to the right-of-way as well as near PG&E substations. And then connected to the right-of-way. And then for the poles and wires, most of it fits inside the right-of-way. There's about 2 out of 102 miles, if you count 51 miles on either side of the right-of-way, that would be slightly outside the right-of-way, something like 2 to 6, 2 to 7 feet. None of that is actually in San Carlos. It's in other locations along the line. The electrical safety zone, so this is carrying 25,000 volts, so it needs an electrical safety zone to be clear of vegetation and to some extent clear of structures for safety, people moving around those structures. So nominally no trees within about 10 feet of the overhead contact system or high vegetation. That's based on guidance from other 25 kV systems, such as the Northeast Corridor, where the Acela runs, and others, and industry standards. Along the entire route, about 18 acres would need to be acquired in an easement to provide for this electrical safety zone. That's about 22 miles out of 102 miles all total. In San Carlos, there's no areas where it encroaches on private property. There's 2 relatively small areas where that zone would reach into a road right-of-way, and we've identified that to city staff, those 2 locations. Important point, this project and this environmental process is clearing Caltrain electrification. So what I've described before in terms of the poles and wires and the electrified rolling stock. That's what's being cleared by this. We also have a cumulative analysis in the document that goes into high-speed rail and other projects. We're not clearing that, we're disclosing that as required by CEQA. So we're not going through an approval process for high-speed rail at this time. And that's pursuant to an agreement between the JPB and the High-Speed Rail Authority about who would be leads for different projects. The JPB is leading Caltrain electrification, environmental process, and the high-speed rail would lead a subsequent separate process for any high-speed rail service along this corridor. The EIR covers both environmental impacts as well as environmental benefits. Some of the benefits include ridership increases. In 2013, we're at about 47,000 and rising. With the project in 2020, that would reach 69,000 and a lot more in 2040 if you had full electrification as well as the downtown extension to San Francisco. Those increased riders will lower the amount of vehicle miles traveled per day from 200,000 2020 to over 600,000 in 2040. The combination of lowering diesel fuel use as well as lowering vehicle miles traveled, offset a little bit by increased electricity emissions, will result in a substantial lowering of common air pollutants, up to 80% by 2020 and 96% by 2040. And will also reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 68,000 metric tons in 2020. That's the equivalent of about 13,000 to 14,000 cars per year. I'm going to go into a few key stakeholder concerns. Obviously, the CEQA document covers many other things. Trees, overhead contact system, noise, electromagnetic fields, local traffic impacts, and station access and freight. So between San Francisco and Gilroy, there's about 19,000 trees inside the right-of-way as well as immediately adjacent to the right-of-way. A worst-case impact, and I mentioned this as a methodology before, the worst-case impact here is that you place the poles outside the outside track that exists there today. And nominally, the poles plus their electrical safety zone would be about 24 feet in total from the center line of the outside track. There are some other designs that may be feasible in some locations that could lower that impact. But based on that worst-case side pole design, we estimate removal of slightly over 2,000 trees and pruning of about 3,600 others. There's a substantial mitigation program, as you would expect, given the amount of tree removal that's potential. The first is to avoid and minimize that by using different pole designs, possibly center poles, possibly poles that reach over 2 tracks instead of over 1 track. Those aren't feasible in all locations. There's a lot of safety, operational, maintenance, and other considerations that go into determining what can be put at any one location. But the mitigation requires Caltrain to take a hard look at that during design and where all those other things can be satisfied to the satisfaction of all those requirements, that you would adopt an alternative design to minimize tree removal. If we can't remove trees, then we have a replacement plan for them. And we identify that biologically we can mitigate all the impacts. We can replant all the trees. But aesthetically, in some locations, if we can't replant right in that location, that's really a site-specific determination, there may be some permanent aesthetic effects due to tree removal. Also on aesthetics, you're adding poles and wires. In some locations, there are a lot of wires already, but in some there aren't. They're going to be about 200 feet apart nominally, and between 30 and 50 feet tall. The poles that you would see here would be more on the lower end of that. The 50-foot tall is really only for terminal stations like 4th and King and Diridon. And then there's wires between the poles. So that will change the visual aesthetics to some extent. We have mitigation that's in there in terms of pole design, pole color, that looks at minimizing that. You can't hide it entirely, but you can lower it, as well as positioning poles to make sure that they don't go in front of historic stations, of which you have one here in San Carlos. This is a visual simulation. This is in Palo Alto at Churchill Avenue, looking southward. You can see this is the outer pole design, sort of outside each track, and then looking down the line with vegetation cleared areas on the outboard side of the poles. Project noise, you have offsetting impacts. The electrical multiple units are quieter than diesel locomotives, particularly at the lower speeds, like when they're pulling out of the station, when they're pulling in, but also at the higher areas. But we're going to increase service, and so regardless of whether it's an electric train or a diesel train, the FRA requires that you sound horns at grade crossings. Of course, you have had a large grade separation project, so you benefit from the fact that increased service does not result in those increased horns at Holly Street, for example. We also have some noise from traction power facilities as well. Up and down the line, we studied almost 50 locations. About 2/3 of those, we actually lowered the noise a little bit. About 8 locations is about the same, and about 8 locations it went up just a little bit, but a less than significant amount. One of the traction power facilities in South San Francisco has a significant impact, but we can mitigate that with some baffling and shielding. With an electric line, you generate 2 fields from all electric equipment, an electrical field and a magnetic field. So you'll have those from the overhead contact system, from the trains when they go by. They pull a lot of power and they have a little bit of a surge. And also the traction power facilities. We studied them in the document. We compared them to published health thresholds for both electric and magnetic fields and found that the levels on the train, adjacent to the train and adjacent to the right-of-way, to be well under those published health thresholds. There's also a potential for electromagnetic interference with highly sensitive equipment. Think of medical imaging equipment, for example. This is sometimes there are some stray currents and other things that can affect those. That's come up on other electrified rails. They've always been able to deal with that with specific design treatments to make sure that that doesn't occur, and it's a site-specific consideration, and we think that's feasible to do as mitigation on this project. Overall, we have a regional benefit in terms of lowering regional traffic, and actually within San Carlos, we actually have a overall citywide effect of reducing VMT about 1% in total. But there can be some localized effects at grade crossings and at stations due to increased trains crossing the grade crossings or increased number of people driving to a station. So we looked at about 82 intersections all total. About a quarter of those we had significant impacts. At the one location we studied in San Carlos, it was not a significant impact that we found. We actually found a benefit in one of the peak hours and a slight increase in delay, but below the significant level here in your city. At other locations where we had those significant impacts, we have some signal improvements, some local roadway improvements that we can mitigate most of those except for 9 to a less than significant level. Station access and egress, Caltrain will continue the Bikes on Board program and will continue to expand wayside facility improvements, bike parking, working with bike share programs. For pedestrian access, all of the stations look like they can handle the pedestrian access that's necessary, except for 4th and King, which is extraordinarily busy today, and we're going to add more folks with this project and with Central Subway and other improvements, so we need to work with the city of San Francisco on that. Parking demand at most of the stations is okay, but at 7 stations we can't quite meet it with what exists as well. That could result, at the worst case, of 1,000 riders all over who might decide not to use Caltrain. We actually think the dominant response will be to use alternative modes, to go to other nearby stations that have adequate parking, to get dropped off, maybe to ride your bike. At San Carlos, we don't identify a parking deficit, so this is an impact at other stations. And it's not at the adjacent stations to you either. So it's particularly further south, such as Tamian Station, is where this issue is bigger. And we're going to be doing ongoing improvements per our existing plans. Freight rail, there's a couple impacts of this project potentially to freight rail. One is if you add overhead lines in some constrained locations, that could limit the height of equipment, equipment that it could go through. We modified the project to include some minor improvements, lowering the track in a few locations or scraping the top off the tunnel in a couple of the San Francisco tunnels to make sure that if you can run the freight today, you could run the freight tomorrow with our project. The other is that the operating window for freight would be compressed a little bit. They operate primarily at night today. They'd be restricted to midnight to 5 a.m. Because in order to get permission to run these EMUs on this project, the Federal Railway Administration has specified that freight and EMUs cannot be on the rails at the exact same time. They have to be temporarily separated. That will limit it, those hours a little bit for freight, but there's a relatively small amount of freight that's actually operating on the system right now. So we think that you can, although it's going to be inconvenient for the operators, they can still operate their business and move the amount of freight they're moving now. Lots of alternatives that were suggested in scoping. We analyzed them all. We screened them down looking at feasibility, purpose and need, and environmental effects. We analyzed 4, no project, which you always have to do under CEQA. A diesel multiple unit alternative that would not include electrification on the peninsula, but it would include increased service. A dual mode multiple unit alternative that wouldn't include electrification on the peninsula, but it would be able to, there's trains that can operate in both an electric and a diesel mode that have both pieces of equipment on them. It would operate in electric mode to go all the way into the downtown extension, since that's an enclosed tunnel and enclosed station. It's being designed for electric use only, so that's a way that you could get further but still run in a diesel mode on the peninsula. Neither of those two alternatives actually meet our purpose and need, but there was public interest, so we included them. And we include a construction alternative consisting of a factory train, which is a faster, somewhat more intense way to mount everything on a train and sort of move it along and install the poles as you go. It's kind of a new way of installing overhead contact systems that's being piloted in the UK right now. Cumulative analysis, you're looking at contributions to cumulative impacts. We look at rail projects in the corridor, other transportation projects, and local development along the corridor, mixed-use projects and things like that. The key rail projects are high-speed rail blended service, the downtown extension, the Transbay Terminal, as well as tenant railroad service expansions. Every railroad that's out there has ambitions to expand if you look out several decades. For high-speed rail, we don't have a specific design of high-speed rail at this point. We have conceptual ideas about it, so that's the level of analysis that we put in the EIR. It's up to 4 trains per peak hour per direction, and up to 110 miles per hour is what we studied. That's based on what Caltrain has evaluated previously for a blended system. We're looking at it at stations at Diridon, Millbrae, San Francisco, maybe Redwood City, and then there would be other system improvements, track improvements for doing 110 miles per hour, potential grade separations if necessary, passing tracks. And passing tracks, we presented 5 different options that have been studied to date. The document does not endorse, select, identify a preferred one. It just lists the ones that have been studied to date and discloses their impact at a very general level, as well as a maintenance yard that would be needed. Obviously, with increased rail service, you would have benefits in terms of air quality, reduced greenhouse gas, regional traffic. Some of the adverse effects that we identify of blended service, and as well as all the other rail service, include aesthetics and land use, particularly where new facilities are needed at stations, passing track areas, if they go outside the Caltrain right-of-way, grade separations where necessary. Noise and vibration, if you count up all the trains that are included in this, it could be almost a doubling of the train traffic. That will result in significant noise and vibration impacts, and we identify some cumulative mitigation to address that. Localized traffic at the stations, particularly Millbrae, Diridon, San Francisco, would be much higher than just with Caltrain. And freight rail, with all that passenger rail running down there, it becomes more challenging to operate freight rail. You can still do it, but we think there are some limits on how much you could expand that. The mitigation that's identified in the document, Caltrain isn't responsible to mitigate high-speed rail and every other project that goes out there. It's responsible to mitigate what its project, what its actions contribute to, and so we include fair share funding contributions from Caltrain for that. I think you know all this. I'm going to skip it. The comment period goes through April 29th and was distributed. We used a 60-day comment period, longer than the required 45 days. We're looking to finish up the final EIR in fall, and Caltrain is looking to certify that EIR, hopefully, and adopt the project by the end of this year. We had 4 public meetings at various locations, and we just finished those up last week. And that's our presentation.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Mary Ann. Questions? Cameron.
Thanks, guys, for your informative presentation. I just had one quick question. Can you tell me the linkage between, one of the key benefits of the project that you guys were talking about was you're going to get more trains per hour. Is that necessarily linked to electrification? Is that the only way you get more trains per hour, and can you explain that?
No, it's not the only way.
Okay. So that's a separate. So thinking about more trains at peak hour is not really tied to electrification. Electrification is kind of serving other purposes. Is that right? Is it more about saving energy, or can you sort of articulate what the key benefit of this project is?
Sure. It's really a business case with a couple of key criteria. So one is more capacity, which other technologies can do. But what we also try to do was find a way to reduce our subsidy. So removing ourselves from the diesel dependency. Right now it's about 15 million or so a year. It'll be a significant savings going from diesel
So
to
electricity is cheaper than gas?
Very much so. And then our board is also environmentally conscious, and they would like to reduce its footprint.
So you're spending $1.5 billion to do the electrification. So you get, and you're only spending $15 million a year on diesel fuel, you said?
Yes.
So do you make up the $1.5 billion through, how many years does it take to make up the $1.5 billion if it's all diesel fuel savings?
Yeah, I don't have that information with me, but it does make up over time. And if I can just be really clear about the costs.
Yeah.
So the total program is $1.5 billion. $230 million is for that advanced signal system project.
Okay.
And that leaves about $1.225 for electrification and for the purchasing of the electric multiple units.
Okay. For the
I'm sorry.
and I understand we're short on time in this.
No. I actually wanted to expand on your question a little bit because this is actually a little bit news to me. I had always heard that a big rationale for doing electrification was that it did improve the scheduling, because the trains can accelerate out of the station faster, and so therefore you can have a tighter schedule. You can put more trains per hour through. So when you asked the question, the answer we got was very different from what I expected.
Well, I was
to hear.
referencing the slides. Well, it's only one more train per hour. So then that begs the question: do you really need electrification to get only one more train per hour? And then there was you showed that you considered an alternative in which you just added another diesel train. Is that right? So.
Yeah, if I can elaborate, the mayor hit the high point here, which is that acceleration. This is a commuter railroad, so it's not an intercity railroad that goes 50 miles and then stops and everything. It goes a couple miles and then stops. And so in the EIR, you'll see the increased amount of service can go up dramatically as a result of being able to accelerate and decelerate out of the stations. It's not so much the top speed as much as you lose a lot of speed coming into the station and coming out of the station. So we can add more trains. You could do that with diesel, it's true, but you won't. But the more you add, the more stops you add, you take it all out of the overall travel. Whereas with the EMUs, you can add more stops and still achieve similar service times end to end as you can today. And that makes a big difference if you don't have to as many skip-stop schedules, and you can fill in the gaps, if you will, in that schedule. So you're getting benefits from both more trains per hour as well as more stops at more stations, and those both drive the ridership.
And would you say shorter commute times? Is that?
So it's a policy decision that has to be made. So the vehicle performance will give you decreased travel time and or more station stops. How that's going to be balanced has to be figured out.
I see. I would suggest that's a good bullet point to add to the slides for future presentations, because it's a public benefit, and I think some of the other things about that you're necessarily getting more capacity for electrification maybe is a little misleading. So,
Others?
Questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I had some.
Do you want to hold off and have Ron go first and come back to you? Or I wasn't sure if you were ready to proceed.
No, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
That's okay. I'm not sure how much it'll impact our letter, but I suppose it might, so let me get these answered. The first question I had is there's a statement in the documents that says will require the installation of an overhead contact system. And I question that language being so strong because in your presentation you admit that there's other alternatives, and then the other thing that comes to my mind is even with electrification, which is I guess what the document is saying when it makes that very strident statement, with electrification, is this really the only technology available? And you know, I'm just, let me be comical here a little bit. I'm reading Thomas Edison right now, the biography about Thomas Edison, and you just look at, you know, where technology went with the telegraph to the telephone to the everything that moved so fast in the late 1800s. And here we're still operating trains with overhead contact systems? You got to be kidding me. And, you know, in the late 1950s, early 60s, Walt Disney created Disneyland and had a monorail system, which is beautiful. And now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to go to a BART system with the third rail, but I can't believe the technology is not there that still allows freight to run, and that was a concern of mine. You answered that question. That allows freight to run, but still can have a train that operates on an electrical system without these, what I consider to be very unsightly overhead systems. And as a council member and resident in this city, having lived in San Francisco and experienced the overhead systems they have there with streetcars and everything else, this is not something I want to see done in San Carlos.
Yeah, so I blew through the alternative slide very quickly, but we actually have an alternative in there that's extend BART. So BART.
But I said I don't want to see BART.
No, yeah, but a third rail system. Let's call it not BART, but you know, a third rail system has a live wire at grade. It requires the entire route to be grade separated. That is the only way you can operate a safe third rail system. This is pulling a lot of power, and so you need to isolate the power from any potential for contact. With an overhead wire, you can have at-grade crossings, and so we actually looked at that alternative. We screened it out due to cost. I think we all know the costs of extending a BART-type system. As far as the other technologies that are out there, like a wireless, you know, or something where it's, you know, some of the systems, they're all experimental at this phase. So there isn't this is the standard system that is used in Japan, in Europe, and other parts of, this is a proven technology. It's an existing technology. And while there is potential maybe long time in the future for completely battery run or inductive systems or something, none of those are proven right now as an operational system. And so we have to work with what is feasible today.
The next question I have is, in the draft EIR, although we don't have a copy of the draft EIR, we just have the high points that you've given us, which is fine. But I hate reading those things. But the question I had is, you know, there's savings on CO2 that's mentioned, and you give all the reasons. But what I don't see is a countering factor of, you mentioned, for instance, at certain intersections, there's going to be traffic backup because you're going to have more trains running and flying through. And even though we don't live in Redwood City, one of the concerns I have personally is thinking about where they don't have a grade separation right now at Whipple, and if more trains are going through, that's going to impact that roadway, which, you know, the trickle effect is it could affect us. Because if that becomes a problem at Whipple, getting across and getting to the El Camino, a lot of people, myself included, you know, if I'm coming from south on 101, I exit Whipple oftentimes and come up that way as opposed to go Holly, because we've got a problem with Holly, right? So the cumulative effect on the CO2 math of intersections, the tree removal, you've said that you've identified so many trees that are going to be removed, and they said there's a mitigating factor, but we don't know the mitigating factor, that it necessarily is going to happen. And the other thing we don't know is when you're looking at all the math on the CO2, we gave presentations here. Presentations were given to us about more trees at the transit village, and now we're told we can't have those more trees, and the trees that are there, we either have to take them out or prune them or whatever. So that's another cumulative impact that I'm concerned about on your CO2 calculations. And then the other one is freight usage that you mentioned. You said that the carriers or the outfits that run the freight are going to have to work with this new timetable. I'm concerned about that because one of the things I know for sure is that freight being run on a train versus, say, in a truck or other means of moving freight around, it's one of the most economical and environmental friendly ways of moving freight. And so if we're going to hurt that freight system, do we have an impact there? So I've identified 3 things that could be cumulative, and are they figured into your math on CO2 savings?
They actually are. So I'll deal with each one very briefly. So first off, on the traffic side of things, okay, while there would be at some locations, and I actually think Whipple is less than significant in its effects, but might have to check the document, but there are other areas where you have congestion effects, to be sure. But between those areas, you have a lot less people on the road with the project. And that's actually, we looked at the VMT in every single city along the entire route, and in every single one, vehicle miles traveled in every single city, and we found that it was lower in every single one. So it's not just a regional benefit, it was actually a city-by-city benefit. So if you have less people on the arterials, yes, at certain locations, there's going to be some localized congestion. But regionally, because of that lowering of VMT, it's going to outweigh it by a lot. And we've looked at this in many projects. On the trees, we actually did factor in the temporary loss and the regrowth we actually sort of grew the trees in the model, if you will. And again, it's a very small amount, but we actually did take that into account quantitatively in those numbers that you're seeing. So it's a net number. So we're not ignoring that. The third was in freight. So in freight, in the existing situation with the project, not taking into account the cumulative for a moment of increased freight in the future, we think that they can haul about the same amount of freight. They may have to put in a longer train and do it once every 2 nights instead of in 1 night. That's not really going to change the greenhouse gas efficiency. In the cumulative, where all the freight operators will tell you that they're always going to increase the amount of freight that they can run, we'll see if that happens, we actually calculated what would happen if you diverted one of those to trucks. And it is less efficient, as you correctly pointed out. But even taking that into account, it's outweighed dramatically by the other benefits of the project. And so we actually disclosed that in the cumulative. We did the calculations, and we showed that even if you diverted a train or 2, I think we even did a 3, this benefit would be substantially outweighed. And so you're correct to point those out, but the magnitude of the reduction from the project really outweighs all 3 of those.
So the only thing I needed to hear, though, and I think you said it is figured into the math. You gave us the rosy side of it, which is fine, of vehicle miles traveled and things you mentioned earlier in your presentation. But I just wanted to make sure that the negatives were also calculated into
yes, they are, and you're right to point them out. Yeah.
Okay, good. And then the last question I have is just a concern overall with, we didn't used to have these on the dais, and these use electricity. And there's just a lot of stuff that we're using, a plethora of things that we're using these days that require electricity, and charging these at night and so forth. And, these are rather minor, perhaps, I don't really know, but a concern I have is with, hybrid cars and trains converting from diesel. As we pat ourselves on the back for moving away from fossil fuels, we move to electricity, and it's not often discussed, where does that electricity come from? It just doesn't fall out of the sky. We either have to dam rivers or coal power plants or nuclear power plants, or somehow we have to produce it, right? So was that looked at in your draft?
Yeah, we included emissions. The one place where emissions go up is for electricity emissions. And so we actually included those in those net numbers. And so there's a drop in diesel, a drop because of the vehicle miles traveled of people driving, and there's an increase due to electricity. But overall, electricity as a mode for greenhouse gas, as a mode of transportation energy, is much more efficient than the use of fossil fuels. That's as a general statement,
right,
and happens to be true very specifically in this. So we've accounted for that in the calculation.
So maybe this isn't your responsibility, but I guess what I'm in part saying is we're using all these things, who's looking at where this electricity is supposed to come from? And, Lord knows we're not supposed to build any nuclear power plants, so we're putting an increase on the electric grid system. So I was looking for that as a comment on your bullet points in terms of cumulative, because it is a cumulative impact on the Western United States electrical grid system. The power's got to come from somewhere, and at some point we're going to reach a point where this demand is going to require us to build more power plants. There's just no way around it.
So some of the technical work that's been done behind the environmental document is we have had initial discussions with PG&E, and we have been running load analysis since the old environmental document was done, both looking at it in terms of what we need and what they're able to pull off their grid with their existing suppliers and future ones to come, looking out several decades. So they have the capacity for it. It matches our need. And then what we now need to do is update that study. But our initial discussions are good. The other thing that we need to do outside of the environmental document is in the environmental document, we assumed pulling off the PG&E network with their suppliers. But there are some property that use other suppliers, for example, BART. And so as we move the project forward, we're going to look at different options and see what might be most cost effective.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Ron?
Thank you. Nice presentation, Mary. Nice to see you again. I was hoping you'd come because there were a lot of things you said at the last meeting that I was trying to write down and remember. One of my questions was looking at the fact that these poles are going to be 200 feet apart, and I think our city's about 2 miles long, and by my math, that's 50-something poles for the length of the city. Are the poles going to be placed with the thought in mind that they're going to avoid some areas that have more trees than others, or the pole's going to go where they go, and if there's a tree in the way, then the tree's got to go? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so the 35% design really did a, I don't want to use this term, so please don't take it. It was a cookie cutter approach. So they took the basic units of 200 feet apart and they really placed it just right outside of the tracks. One of the first things that we'll be asking the designers to do is to scrub the whole corridor, looking at the location of the poles and then the configuration of the poles, so that the first thing would be to try and avoid impacting the trees. And where they can, there'll be impact, but that's one of the first tasks that they'll be asked to do.
All right. So using that cookie cutter approach, is that where, say, the potential of 2,200 trees being removed comes from?
That's correct.
If you were just indiscriminate, or you just used simple math and said, we're going to start at San Francisco and we're going to do it every 200 feet and trees be darned.
That's exactly what we did.
Okay. That's what I want. Oh, my second thing, Matt, I wanted to let you know, I do have a copy of that EIR if you'd like it. Sounds silly.
Please keep it.
Reading to the record.
Then the other question I had was, how many, when I did the math, it worked out to about, if you just do the math again, it's 86 trees, and I just took 2,200 trees and divided by 51 miles, and I got 43 trees per mile. And does that mean that there's about 86 trees in San Carlos that are going to be affected, or has there been a more accurate count?
There wasn't. It's in here.
Yeah, and I think I saw it somewhere, so I apologize. I may have forgotten it.
Rich.
Yeah, it's so it's an estimate based on a canopy analysis of 78 removed and 154 pruned in San Carlos, and it's based on the canopy analysis. We'll have to follow this up with the specific tree delineation, working with the actual tree designs to see is that going to be the actual amount or not. But that's the estimate that's in the DEIR, because the tree canopy really varies a bunch between different locations. There's other places that have much higher removal numbers, I would say, than San Carlos on a per mile basis, but they varied it based on the density of the canopy.
So would you say that the impact on our trees is significantly less than the other cities, or somewhat
it's
less?
Significantly less than Menlo Park and Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and Atherton, for example. It's in the, It depends if they're the trees in front of your house or not. Whether it can get down to a very personal level. But at a city scale, it's more moderate, relatively speaking.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, and then the other question I had was that when you take a tree out, we had one of our residents wrote a letter today that I think we all got, which said he wanted a specific number of trees planted for every tree replaced. Is there do you have some sort of a formula for that, and how the number of trees you replace? And
there's a ratio that's actually provided in the EIR, and we used where local ordinances provided. So we used the local ordinance to define what is or is not a tree in each jurisdiction because it varies. And we also, where your local ordinance said replacement of heritage trees is done by a 24-inch tree or whatever it is, we use those specifics in the mitigation. And I believe yours does provide that. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is, but I know that's how we applied it.
Now, you have my permission to take out any eucalyptus tree. So.
I don't think there are any on the rail line.
Bob?
Noted.
No. Okay. Thank you. Just a couple of quick ones. One to follow on Ron's question. The 78 trees that are estimated to be removed in San Carlos, is that after? How does that relate to the additions that were proposed to be made relative to the Transit Village project? Because the Transit Village project was
based on existing trees.
Okay, so
that are there, so it does not take into account.
So if you were to take into account, what would you estimate the impact would be?
I don't know offhand, but
obviously
we could look into that if we got that comment.
Obviously, more than 78.
Clearly,
yeah.
It would just depend on looking at the landscaping plan and figuring out the distances.
And do you recall what the ratio is for the tree replacement? I didn't catch that when you were talking to Ron. Is it 1-for-1? Is it 2-for-1? Or is it?
It's different. It's different for different cities. So I don't remember.
You're applying the heritage tree ordinance, which means that if a tree that's removed doesn't fit the heritage tree definition, it doesn't get replaced.
No, that's a good question. So for trees that are outside of the right-of-way, that's where we would apply the local tree ordinance if it has those specifics. For trees that are inside the right-of-way, we're proposing a 1-to-1 replacement of any tree, whether it's listed as protected or not. And then the one exception in the current mitigation is that if it's in an industrial area as opposed to a residential commercial area with like aesthetic concerns, we're not proposing to replace the trees that are inside the right-of-way that are not protected. So if they were listed on your heritage ordinance, we would replace them whether they're inside or outside the right-of-way. If they're not listed as a protected tree and they're in an industrial area, we're not proposing to replace those.
What does the berm through San Carlos count as? Parts of it run?
We define that as by what the adjacent land use. If it was commercial or residential, we define that as covered and non-industrial.
We can get back to staff with the specific numbers for your city.
I'd be interested in that.
Yep, you bet.
I had a bunch of comments, but we'll get to that in discussion. One other question I had is we had a presentation at our last meeting about traffic growth on Holly Street over the next, I think it was 20 years, estimated to be on the order of about 40%, probably, and I don't know whether that was miles traveled or vehicles, probably vehicles per day. Do you recall what you used for the assumption of baseline traffic growth that you're looking to reduce off of?
We used, so the traffic model used the growth that's in ABAG, MTC's Plan Bay area, and so we use that for projections for 2020 and 2040.
Does staff know how that relates to that 40% figure we were given? City staff? No? Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Good. Thank you.
Welcome.
If there's any public comment, I don't have any cards, but if there's any public comment that people would like to make, be happy to take it. Okay, seeing none. Let's see.
So question here, just among the dais or staff, if I may. Just so we're commenting on this letter that goes and becomes part of the process with the draft EIR, but specifics of this project will also come to the council?
At the continuing development of the project, we'll be able to bring that back, let council know where they are in the process, how the EIR is going when they get close to the final document, that kind of thing. Is that what you mean?
No, what I mean is, the EIR is one thing, and it's asking, as I understand the process, each time we do one of these is if you identify something that's a real major concern, what it's really saying is we want you to mitigate this because you're not going to, it's not like you're going to use an EIR generally to stop a project. That doesn't happen very often. Mostly what happens is things get mitigated if you see them as problems, significant problems. So, we've made our concerns be known, mostly about poles and trees, so fair enough. Then the project actually comes forward. Are we going to have a say as a council, at least give some input representing our citizens here about the project and how we think it ought to look and, that sort of thing?
Well, just a moment. I'll ask Marion to come up and address how the agencies will be involved in that process going forward.
Thanks. I thought you were going to answer it.
I can answer it.
So what we're envisioning is we've got 17 cities and 3 counties that we're going to impact. And for each city and the 3 counties, we're going to have to think through what kind of agreement we should have. We're going to have a bunch of mitigations for each of the cities, and you all have customized ordinances. And so I believe each city will have their process of how they get into agreements. So that's one venue in which it'll come back to you.
Okay. But Mary, we will not be able to vote against the project. We can vote against it, but it's going. In other words, you're not going to stop it at San Carlos, jump us, and go to Redwood City. I'm just trying to identify.
Well, I'm not asking to stop
Well,
it.
that
I'm
seemed like
saying,
where you were going there.
No. I'm not looking at stopping the project by any means.
I'm just saying,
I'm
we're
more
not.
That's
looking
good
We're going to
news.
have an agreement. We're going to have an agreement. I apologize, but we're going to have an agreement. But we may not like the agreement, but that's the agreement we're going to get because the project is going through. So
Yeah, I think what's really important to look
let's
at.
understand that. Okay, we're not. It's not like a regular one we're out
No.
or any of this other stuff where we could do it on our own. We're not going to be able to stop this. So
Right.
It's coming with
No.
the wires and with the poles. So.
But we could have we will be allowed to have some input into the design details of some of the aspects of it.
Some.
Yeah, so what I was going to, the letter that the city submits, I think for all the cities, it's really important for staff and the council to look at how the mitigation is written, because that'll set the parameters of what we're signing up for. That'll bound the discussions that we have in terms of specifics of how the mitigation is carried out. So we will come back to work out the specifics with you, but it's really important in the environmental document to catch sort of the parameters of the level of mitigation.
See, I'm glad I asked the question because the language in this, how strong we want it to be about either the appearance of the poles or the tree removal and aspects of replacing trees, I think is really important, and which we can have in discussion. So it was a good question to ask, I think. Thank you very much.
All right. We don't have a motion necessary on this. We do have a draft letter in front of us. So who would like to begin by making some comments on suggested edits that they'd like to see? And they don't necessarily need to be in specific grammatical form. Jeff, I'm sort of looking to staff to keep track of the list of the changes so that you and I and Greg can work on how to actually craft it into readable language.
So I'm going to hit on one. I thought it was mentioned that there is the option of center pole placement with cantilevering over to the tracks.
In some areas.
In some area. Well, if it's possible, and this is what, we can have a discussion on it, but to me, that would be preferable for us as a city.
Agree.
And if we can put some comment to that effect into this letter, I think I would like to see that.
Okay. My thought is, as we're going through this, we could sort of either accumulate all these and then go back and see which ones have majority support on, or we could do it one by one as we go through. I'm leaning towards the second approach, if that's okay.
I only have one more comment, and that is that it has to do with tree removal. If we're going to be removing trees, I think there has to be some kind of effort between city staff, Caltrain, JPB, and the proponents of the transit village to still look at a way, what the east side is looking for is some type of urban forest, if you will, to mitigate the impact of the transit village. And what is being told to us tonight is that not only can't we have the trees that were shown to us to be added to what's already there, we're taking away what's already there, and somehow we may find a way to put those trees back in, but I think it has to be more than just somehow we're going to find a way. We will find a way, and I think we need some kind of ratio of for every tree that's removed, we put in a quarter of a tree, so that, you know, for every one that's removed, we ended up putting back a tree and then an additional tree. Not say a 1 to 2 ratio, but a 1 to, what would that be? A 20% increase overall, or a 25% increase overall.
Let's talk about those two.
Excuse me. The reason I brought the Transit Village into it is because while we may not be able to do that for their project to go through, if you look at the rail corridor as an area outside of their corridor where they're trying to put in the electrification, we have to look at that entire zone as being where we want this urban forest.
Okay.
I'm using the East Side's term there.
So, as I said, what I'd like to do is as we go through these, each one of us offering stuff, let's decide which ones we want to put in. The notes that I have, Matt's saying that we ought to include some language saying that we would like a central pole cantilever system to be preferred. That would be preferred. I'm fine with that. What do other people feel? Anybody opposed to it, including that? Cameron? Okay, so that one's in. And then the tree, let me not call it tree removal, tree replacement. The only thing I wanted to ask you about what I'd like to see personally included in that is related to the question I asked, which is I think the starting point ought to be the trees that were anticipated to be there as part of the Transit Village project. So even though those are not physical trees that actually are being removed, as far as I'm concerned, if they're not planting them, they're being removed. And so the ratio applies to that somehow.
Very good. That would be good to me.
How do others feel about both that and the issue of the tree replacement?
Actually, if I may comment before we go on, what you're proposing would be different, but fine with me in terms of what I was proposing. I was proposing for every tree that's there, that's removed, we put in 1.25 trees, so that when we're done, we end up with more trees than we have now. But what you're saying is we include the trees that were planned and shown to us. Those, if they can't be put in, they have to be put in somewhere else.
And personally, if we include those, I would actually be willing to do just a 1-for-1 ratio for me.
Exactly.
Okay. So,
all right. And I think it's important that that everyone involved with Caltrain know that we're a little unique. We're really the only city, I believe, that has a raised track. We have a berm the entire length of the city. So the trains are more prominent than any other city. They don't, they run above everything else. So the importance of the trees, I believe, becomes even more pronounced. And so I generally agree with the prior comments about the number of trees replaced, but I think that I would like to have staff work with Caltrain to see as many trees as can feasibly be planted, because I realize there are areas where it's probably not going to work. There's too narrow. I mean, there's not enough room between the tracks and the street. Say, for example, along Old County Road. So maybe one of the mitigations is that we explore the possibility of maybe putting trees across the street, for example.
And if I may follow up. Greg, this is reminding me of conversations we had about the Transit Village EIR ages ago. Is there enough of the nexus with this EIR scope, basically, that we can do something like that, saying if the trees, basically 1-for-1 replace the trees that you're going to have to take out. If you can't fit them in along the berm, put them someplace nearby.
This is sort of tonight is a slightly different issue than that, but what you're doing is providing all comments of all the environmental impacts that you think might come from this project. That could include the impact from the removal or failure to replace trees, or even the what you were talking about, the trees that were already approved in the transit village, and counting those. So what you're doing tonight, really, the nexus isn't it. It's we want you to mitigate any and all impacts, including trees.
Okay.
And so you want to put that in your comment letter so that later on, when they propose mitigations for your comments, you can then say your mitigation wasn't adequate. There's still an significant environmental impact from your project.
Thank you for the clarification. Cameron and Bob, how do you feel about this? What's your perspective on the trees?
I think we should ask for the moon and the stars, but we're going to get. I know what we're going to get, but we're going to ask for it. I think we should ask for it.
Are you okay with asking one for one?
Whatever the number the council wants to do.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
I agree. I mean, to me, the key sentence is the last sentence on the tree section where it says the city requests that a contribution be made to a tree replacement fund for off-site placement. I think we should be specific about what that contribution is. So
okay.
Either put a number or say what contribution we think is appropriate for removing a tree.
All right. Is that clear, what we're looking to do? Bob, did you have other things other than those two that you wanted to ask for? You want to ask for the moon? We could ask for the moon.
Go ahead and keep talking.
All right, I'll pass to the other side of the dais. Cameron, are there other things that you would like to include or things that you want to ask?
I wanted to make a brief general comment about the project, but
feel free.
This discussion is eye-opening to me, and I think we should keep an eye on this project. I'm not clear that the benefits are that strong, and I know it's not necessarily our say, but while we were sitting here and having some of this discussion, a lot of what the presenters said is that really ultimately it's an environmental impact, and I consider myself an environmentalist, and I looked and said we're going to get 68,000 metric tons of CO2 that's going to be saved, and I looked up on the EPA. They have a little calculator. What does 68,000 tons of CO2 get you? And that gets you, according to the EPA, gets you 2% of one coal-fired power plant. And then you looked up how many coal-fired power plants are there in the United States. Well, there's about 600. So we're going to spend about $1.5 billion, electrify, all the way from here to San Francisco, and we're going to save the equivalent of 2% of one coal-fired power plant. And I don't know exactly how to feel about that, but it doesn't feel. And not to mention, it's a 15-year project at this point. So it feels like the pace on a lot of these things, particularly things are aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, are too slow. And I wonder whether you get a lot of the benefit from just adding another train and getting people out of their cars, even if it's diesel powered and you do it quicker. So anyway, I think it's something that we should talk about, and maybe not even in this forum, but in whatever forum.
Let me pull on that a little bit, because one of the reasons I was encouraging you just to make a general comment is there might be something lurking in there. For example, a question for Greg, could we incorporate some of what, the gist of what Cameron is saying is we're not sure that this project actually makes as much sense as is being implied, and particularly that there might be an alternative to electrifying the system that would get most of the benefit.
That's right.
Is that something that is appropriate or not inappropriate, let's say, to include in the letter?
Sure. You could put that in, that you're not satisfied that the draft EIR has analyzed alternatives that would further lower greenhouse gas emissions, and you would like that analyzed in the final EIR and have them comment on that.
I think it's actually, I think what Cameron was saying is a little bit different. Not that it didn't analyze alternatives that would lower it further. It's that it's not making, it's very expensive, not making much of an impact on greenhouse gases.
That's right.
And you could get most of the other benefit by putting an extra train on. So why not just do that, and so we don't end up with all these ugly catenaries all over the place?
Well, that's pretty close to the no project alternative. I think that, I think that would be a legitimate comment to put in the letter, that you're not satisfied and that you believe the no project alternative or something close to it is a more appropriate way to, from an environmental standpoint? Because remember, you're writing a letter commenting on the draft DIR, so that's what you want it to be in that context.
How does the rest of the dais feel about that observation? For
I
including?
have a question, just in terms of terminology. To me, what Mr. Johnson's talking about is, we're looking at a DEIR, Draft Environmental Impact Report, and what he's talking about is an economic impact, really. But it's impact, it's money, it's public money that's chasing after, a couple of things, getting people from point A to point B most efficiently, and two, while you're doing that, also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, and so what you're saying is, does it make sense to spend money here so much when you can get nearly the same benefit by spending less money here? And I agree with you. So I would like the comment to be in there, but is that, I guess the city attorney has said it is appropriate. But that's the prism through which I see it.
Right. Well, that was
But I did want to add a comment.
Go ahead, please.
I think one of the things we're missing here is that it's not just a matter of, one more train. What we're talking about, yes, it's one more train, but we're talking about longer trains and more service. So we're talking about more people, and more people moving more places has an economic impact. We haven't even talked about the economic impact and what that means to all the different cities that all these people go to and the places that they work and businesses that are created because they know that people will have a mode of transportation to get there. People talk about all the extra traffic we have. Well, a lot of it's coming from 50 miles away, people living in Tracy and Merced commuting to the Bay Area. If we have a more modernized, and I won't suggest that it is the most modern system, maybe Elon Musk has that one in mind, but I think you need to look at a much broader picture, and the potential future economic impact, I think, is more than just one more train, because these trains are longer. We were even talking in these meetings about extending the platforms, because you're going to have longer trains, so you're going to have more people riding those trains, and I think that really needs to be taken into consideration.
Well, I didn't intend it as something necessarily that would go into the letter. I mean, if folks are interested in doing that, we can talk about it. It was just a general reaction, and knowing that we only potentially saw a slice of the larger project here tonight. But I would just say to the presenters that the real value is not screaming out from the presentation, and so I would love to hear more and see more if there is indeed more.
Let's do this in the interest of focusing here on comments. So we have a potential comment we could include. Matt expressed some support for it. Cameron expressed some support for it. I think Ron makes a good point. I'm not so sure that I'm that keen on putting it in the letter. But what we need to determine is whether we want to put it in the letter. So is there anybody who wants to propose strongly that we do it? If not, I would suggest we pass on.
Well, it originated with Cameron, so.
Yeah, I'm fine on passing. I think it's more important to focus on the local impacts right now.
That's fine. Ron, did you have anything else you wanted to suggest?
Nope, I'm fine.
Bob?
No, I just have a comment at the end, that's all.
Okay. I have one that I wanted to bounce off you folks, which is, and I think I know what the answer to it is, and I almost feel like I would still like some more thought applied to the alternative of doing a different system for powering this stuff, like a third rail. Even if I limit it to say it's either overhead catenaries or third rail because everything else is too technologically new to risk using. Particularly when I look at it in the context of San Carlos, we have an elevated berm all the way through, elevated track all the way through town. That provides some separation right there. And I just have a hard time visualizing that it would be that expensive, even if you were talking about running fencing up and down the entire track, okay? The real cost to isolate it, the real cost probably comes at the at-grade crossings, okay? Because where they cross the street, you're going to have a third rail basically in the middle of the street. Obviously very dangerous. But the thing that's in the back of my mind is, you increase the frequency of the trains going on the track, and then you potentially maybe someday put high-speed rail on top of it. I think you're going to have to elevate all the crossings anyway.
You are.
And if you're going to do that, then why are we then going to stick ourselves with a catenary system that we're like, well, gee, if we had known we were going to do this, we could have done another way that wouldn't look quite so ugly. So the point would be to put in something saying we think that option needs to be studied further in the context of it's very likely that there's going to be grade separation during the life of this project anyway.
I want to bring up one thing that a friend of mine and resident in town is a big train nut, for lack of a better term. Because we had this discussion at lunch one day. Why don't you just bring BART all the way down the peninsula? And he said, freight rail doesn't run on a third track. Freight rail is not electrified. It's, as far as we know, and Marion, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to be diesel for who knows how many lifetimes. And that's one reason that we don't have BART down the peninsula, or one of the reasons, is that we have a lot of freight rail that comes down the tracks.
So the technology basically is that if you have the third rail, you can't run a diesel on it.
Well, I'm no train expert, but that's what I've been told.
Okay.
Maybe they can shed any more light on it. Yeah, you would have to separate.
You'd have to have a separate track. Which would be expensive.
That relates to my comment earlier about Thomas Edison, and here we sit, 2014, and technology is what it is.
But it is.
All right. Well, I think in that case, much as I hate the prospect, like others do, about having catenaries, particularly catenaries on top of a berm. There may not be any point in considering that. So right now, the way things stand is we have 2 items that we're going to add to the letter. One is the central pole with cantilever. The other is the tree replacement that we spent time discussing, 1-for-1, based on both real trees and trees that we were promised as part of the transit village, with some more specification about what the tree replacement fund would be for things that can't be replaced near the berm. All right, so those are the 2 things that staff and I will work on before we sign and send this out. I know Bob said that he had a general comment he wanted to make.
I just wanted to say that anyone who has, more input on or feels like they're for or against this, I mean, JPB, Caltrain's voting on this. Yeah. They're the guys. That's why I got a little, we're not the ones voting on this. They are. And if we have a problem, that's where we got to go. And that's where we have to talk to our representatives and say, hey, you know what? These damn things are uglier than blank. And, I tend to agree with you all this way, and we can't do any better. But I know Europe has it. Japan has it. I've been to those places, and that's the technology state. But if the folks on the east side didn't want a transit village, this is going to be worse, in my opinion. And so, anyway, anybody, and I say that to the public and anybody listening, that's where you got to go. You got a problem with it? That's where you got to go. This isn't the venue.
Should we be sending a separate letter to the JPB?
I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying if people are individually, I don't think we should per se be for or against it per se. But I just think anybody who has an insight, anything in this, has to go and talk to those folks. They're the ones voting on it.
All right.
That's all. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that.
That's a good clarification. Thank you.
I could just add to what Councilmember Crisili said. Members of the public also can write comment letters to Caltrain to comment on the draft EIR and get their comments in and raise any other concerns, which would in turn require those comments to be analyzed and addressed in the final EIR.
Jeff, would it be feasible, maybe it's already there, I mean, is there a way to link on our website who the members of the JPB are that one might write to? Listening to Bob talk, I was like, I'm not even sure who I would call.
Sure, we can absolutely provide that information on the website.
I think that for the people who want to comment, that might be useful. Yes, Ron.
Just one last piece of information. The electrification task force meets right over here at the Samtrans building every other month. And I think the next meeting is third Thursday in May, fourth Thursday in May. Those are public meetings. and they start at 6 o'clock on that fourth Thursday of every other month, and the public's invited to make any comments they want, because there's just like these meetings, there's a public comment period.
Thank you, Ron. All right, I think that closes off 10B.
Actually, this is an action item, so we would be looking for a simple motion.
Oh.
Just a motion authorizing the
okay.
mayor to.
Thank you. Well, then I should have done that before we had all that discussion.
I'll make it. I'll move that to authorize the mayor to send a comment letter from the City of San Carlos regarding the draft environmental impact report for the Caltrain Peninsula Corridor Electrification Project.
I second.
Motion and second. I will say I hope there's no further discussion. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we need in the motion, it's understood, but do we need anything in the motion that, relative to comments that we made from the dais and the additional items to be added?
To include direction from council.
Would you accept that as a friendly amendment to include?
Yes.
Cameron?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Call the roll, Crystal.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Olbert?
Yes. All right. Thank you. That brings us to 10C, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an amendment to the professional services agreement with Swinnerton Management and Consulting in the amount of $125,580 for providing construction management services for the East Side Connect Project C9469 and the Old County Road Utility Undergrounding Project C9486.
Honorable Mayor, this is actually a 2-for-1, so this presentation is for item C and D.
Okay. We like efficiency.
Yeah, just trying to get you guys out of here so you can see the
lunar
eclipse. So Councilmember Grisilli can get his moon. My name is Matt Lee. I'm the city engineer. I have with me today to answer questions Kaveh Faruhi in the back row. He's the project manager from the city, and Robert Kagiyama and Dennis Wong from Swinnerton Construction Management, who are the construction managers for the project. I bring before you a project update on the East Side Connect project and Old County Undergrounding project. I'm going to try to keep this brief. Essentially what I have before you today, I'm going to describe the background of the project itself and then focus towards the construction progress to date and to discuss next the challenges and conflicts that we've experienced or we anticipate that are going to occur throughout the remainder of the project and the project impacts from those conflicts to date. And after that, we'll discuss the staff recommendations, which is one that Mayor Olbert just described, and the other item, which is the Swinnerton Construction Management contract itself.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes?
Can I ask, in the interest of time, he mentioned, a brief overview of the project. We know the project, so if we could just go to the conflicts that have created the need for additional time, and we could just hit on that.
Any objections from the dais?
None at all.
Good thought. Matt?
Perfect. I can definitely do that. So as we scroll through the project itself, you understand the progress, a lot of work's being done. The conflicts themselves, there's a lot of conflicts and unforeseen conditions that have occurred throughout the project. And for the Old County Undergrounding project itself, which is a $1 million underground project funded by Rule 20A, there have been a lot of abandoned, mismarked, or unmarked utilities that have caused conflict to the installation of the joint trench and the utility boxes to date. There are some easements that PG&E was supposed to secure up near Hawley at Old County Road that were not, they were unable to secure at the time, which required a couple of redesigns. There was, as we started construction ourselves and tried to move forward with phase 1 of the undergrounding project, there was a conflict with the Caltrain electrical line that was within the joint trench area that required us to reorder the work and start with phase 2. Swinnerton Management Consultant had a lot to do with actually having the contractor redo their schedule to minimize the amount of impacts due to this conflict. It could have potentially been a huge one. Another unforeseen condition is the excessive pavement conditions. I'll show you some photos later. At some places, the asphalt thickness is anywhere from 15 to 20 inches. Typically, they're about 6 inches thick, and so that's caused a delay in terms of the excavation of the areas and demolition for the trench. We are just completed with Phase 2, which is the area south of Hawley. We're now going to move back to Phase 1 because we've worked out the electrical line relocation, and we're anticipating similar challenges on that end north of Hawley. For the Eastside Connect project itself, the challenges that we are anticipating are because this portion of work is the streetscape work that's above ground. It's a little more noticeable to the residents and the community itself. There's going to be a couple of design changes from the community and the property owners' request that we may have to accommodate. We also anticipate there to be an additional cost to the trees that were added to the project itself. There's also some cost if we decide to move forward with the shuttle drop-off area. Recently, we just, through our demolition, has discovered the old roadway that's 2 feet below the existing curb and gutter itself. That develops a significant impact to the demolition and possibly planting of trees at that location. There's, again, excessive pavement thicknesses, and we've also even seen locations where there's been voids in Old County Road themselves that we'd have to regroute back. And due to the challenges that have occurred through the Old County Undergrounding project itself, there's been some potential delay claims from the general contractor for the Eastside Connect project due to the coordination that has to be done between the two projects. Swinnerton Construction Management is, again, working on trying to mitigate those claims right now as we go through our discussions with the contractor, and they've agreed to delay that conversation until we move further along through construction. As I move forward with the photos themselves, this is an example of utility congestion in the area. The gray pipe, as you see in the bottom, is the joint trench, and these above-line pipes are either water lines or gas lines that cross over those locations. Some of these are identified in the plans. Some of these are shown in different locations. Some of these we didn't even know existed until we've opened up the line, and so that's a challenge for the horizontal alignment of these pipes. Nowhere in any of the records do they talk about the vertical alignment. So at some cases, you may have situations where our trench is going to be running through an existing line, and we would have to go and mitigate those. At times, we can get the utility companies to cover for it. It's dependent on the franchise agreement that we have with them. However, that does not mitigate the delays that are occurred through there. That's the cost that the city has to absorb. Another example of a line that was not marked, there was a 4-inch fire line in front of 681 Old County Road where it was not marked, and the underground contractor actually hit that line. Because of this area was so congested, both water services were out there, Peninsula Water and I believe Cal Water, and they were unable to determine whose water line it was and unable to shut it off for approximately 2 hours. With that 4-inch water line at full blast, you could see that it's undermined the foundation of the building under that location. Cal Water has accepted responsibility for it and have since mitigated this and is working on towards repairing it. However, the delay that it caused a couple of days of delay to the general contractor itself for the Old County Undergrounding project. And for emergency situations like this, construction management teams have to be out there to ensure that the area is safe. And for this instance, Swinnerton Management again did a good job of staying there overnight to ensure the safety of Old County Road and that building was the first and foremost thought in people's minds as they were trying to mitigate this situation. Another example would be these utility vaults or boxes. In the contract, they're called utility boxes, but they're actually utility vaults. They're pretty large in size, probably about 9 feet squares. I mean, you can essentially fit people in them. The challenge with these is because we're in such a congested corridor, or for an example, if we cannot obtain an easement for these utility boxes, which PG&E was not able to obtain, we would have to redesign and relocate these boxes out either into the street from the sidewalk, and those have further caused some conflicts due to the fact that, again, we don't know for 100% certain where the utility lines are, And given the fact that we need at least 1 foot of clearance between gas lines and active water lines for these utility vaults, any slight shift in movement in this already congested corridor can cause a redesign or a delay. This is just the prime example of the Caltrain electrical line relocation. Obviously, it was a line that powered the, I believe, the signal system up on the Caltrain berm that was installed as we created this overpass. It was a system where it was unclear as to the responsibility if that line was PG&E owned or Caltrain owned. And with that line itself, it turns out even though it's a service, it's owned by Caltrain. They were not aware of that responsibility, yet they never marked it. And when we went through with the design, it was never shown. However, when we did discover it, we were finally able to have Swinerton Management negotiate with Caltrain again and have them accept responsibility for the cost of that work. However, it did affect delays and had the contractor had to reschedule the work that was done. That's why we started with phase 2 instead of phase 1. Swinerton Construction Management themselves did a really good job in trying to mitigate this impact. They came up with actually an ingenious idea. During the city's furlough period, they had the contractor actually work on the Caltrain line, and that kind of mitigated some of the delays that could have possibly occurred. Another example here is if you look.
Matt, just in the interest of time, if my colleagues would agree with this, I think you've made your point very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much done.
It's just very messy, so.
It's very messy. Because I know I had a couple of questions, and I'm sure other people did as well. So, but no, wrap up your.
Yeah, so it's pretty messy. You see a bunch of stuff everywhere. The asphalt's so thick you can't even break it with
jump to the numbers.
There's the void. There's the underground street under our existing street that now causes a big problem for us.
There you go. That's what we want to say.
The impacts of the schedule, there's already been a 5-month delay due to the conflicts in the undergrounding project. We are hopeful that we have encountered a majority of the delays, and we've already put in contingency to assume completion by January of 2015. The budget impact itself is a $350,000 increase to the Old County undergrounding project. However, that's funded by Rule 20A, which is essentially the funds coming through PG&E and the other 3 utility companies that are helping with the underground project. So there would be no cost to the city or the general fund accounts. The other item is the Swinerton Construction Management contract. PG&E has indicated that they would not fund any construction management costs. However, Swinerton Management has been able to negotiate with them in terms of allowing them to utilize our 10% administrative fee to cover the costs for the Swinerton construction.
Just to clarify, so the $350,000, you said there's no impact on our budget?
There's no impact on our budget because it's funded by the Old County undergrounding project is funded by Rule 20A. That was essentially the reason in project design where we decided to split the projects up because of the complicated funding process.
All right. So basically, I'm just asking for clarification. So basically, the only net increase staff is asking for is roughly $40,000?
Correct.
Okay. That's substantially less than I thought you were asking for what that's worth.
We looked under every nook and cranny possible. So.
Good. Thank you.
If I could just ask one quick question.
Absolutely.
But having said that, what percentage of the project is done now?
I believe for the Old County undergrounding project, it's 50% done. We just finished with phase 2, and we're moving forward to phase 1, which is the area north of Holly. Okay. We have just started the Eastside Connect project in earnest. We were working on locations.
Okay, so percentage is 50% done?
50% for the Old County undergrounding project.
My point is, you're going to be back here, aren't you? You're going to be back here with other dollars.
Not for.
You're telling me that the second half is going to be smooth as silk, and there's nothing you're going to find. There's no pipes. There's no. I'm just anticipating.
Yeah, so for the Old County undergrounding project, $350,000 anticipates the additional conflicts that we're going to find.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
That anticipates problems that you're going to find. That you're going to find.
That we're going to find based on what we found already for the first half of it.
And the
CM budget accounts for the conflicts that we've already experienced and anticipates additional work if we go all the way up until January of 2015.
So you're not going to be back here then, you're saying?
We're not going to be back here for the Old County undergrounding project.
Okay.
Or the
Swinerton
construction contract.
Okay.
However, with Eastside Connect, we've just started that project.
Okay.
And so we may be back for that.
I understand. And I'm just trying to make sure that everybody understands that whatever we vote on this time, I mean, not that we don't love to see you, but we may have to see you again. So
Fair enough.
Murphy's Law.
Other questions?
Very briefly.
All right, Cameron.
Just what do we learn and what are we going to do different next time?
I would say for not to do underground projects. No. Well, I think what we've. I'm just joking. What we've actually learned is that in terms of the conflict itself, we probably would spend a lot more money in the front end, potholing as much as we possibly can. It's going to seem like a high cost and something that may be out of proportion of what we do, but I think it's really important for us to do that. I don't think that's going to mitigate all the challenges we find because it's just messy underground, especially in a congested corridor like Old County Road.
If I may follow up on that, I was actually going to suggest, if the council agrees with this, not in the near term, but when this is done, I personally would love to see kind of a lessons learned report.
We
just have something on file so we can.
Yeah, as our engineering department actually does that for every single project.
Right.
And so we actually have that document. We can easily share that with council.
See, because then we might learn not to do undergrounding projects.
Yeah.
Were you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
So my question is, I guess some of the money's coming from other sources, but my only question was, we're adding time.
Yes.
And so we're adding dollars. And so what I'm looking at is the dollars per time for the ad versus dollars per time under the current contract. Is it the same figure?
I'm trying to see if I'm following you. So I think we all agree that the time equals money, so any delay is essentially going to add cost just because of the mobilization that is required.
Let me cut to the chase. I just want to make sure that we're not paying for like time and a half for additional time to manage the project versus, we were paying straight time to manage the project from the start to where we are today. And I just want to make sure that from today to the end in January 2015 or whenever this ends, that we're not being charged by the construction management firm at $1.50 where we were being charged at $1.
All the projections are accounting for the rates that we've agreed upon as part of our agreement. For the time and a half, I think if it's overtime, we have to obligate.
But the rates are the same.
But the rates are the same based on our current agreement.
That's really all I needed to know. The only other, if I may, just a quick comment is I can tell you really enjoy your work and your job by what you prepared for us, which is good. And the other thing is that you might want to think about reading the biography about Eisenhower, who said when you go to war, you plan, and when you get there, you throw the pants out the window because you find out things that you didn't know.
Well noted.
Good advice. I had a few questions. Bob, Ron, do you have?
No.
Okay. Just quickly here. I got the impression, Matt, that, for example, like take the Cal Water thing where the pipe got hit and it was $3,000 worth of cost, roughly, that they absorbed. But you kept talking about how that introduced delays to the project, which presumably also have a dollar cost impact. In construction management, does the Cal Water in a case like that, do they reimburse us for the extra cost of
So for Cal Water, they obviously have to go through their insurance, and so whatever we can attribute to the incident, they will definitely pay for if they feel that it's warranted. The delay costs are kind of it's kind of hard thing in contract management because what you deal with, other things may cause a delay too, so you can't have a direct sole impact indicating that this actually caused that delay, because as you can see, there's a lot of things that cause that delay, and you kind of get into this legal limbo of kind of trying to.
Fair enough. Let me just say, personally, this might be an area where I wouldn't mind if our city attorney was particularly aggressive. Okay? I was hoping we'd be able to get through this, but probably not. All right. May I have a motion to extend the meeting?
I move we extend the meeting to 10:45.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay. All All right, that was that. And then the last question I had is, you talked about change requests coming in from community, property owners, whatnot. I trust we're managing those and sort of pushing back where we can.
Yeah, we are. I think our project manager and the construction management team is doing a good job actually interfacing with a lot of the residents and businesses out there in the community. I think that's reflective on the kind of feedback that you guys have been probably getting. It seems noticeably small compared to the dollar amount of the project. I mean, you've seen smaller projects that you get more feedback on, and I think that's a direct result of what the project management team and the construction management team is doing. They're kind of heading them off.
This next comment, I'm just speaking for myself, unless anybody else on the dais wants to endorse it. Given how far the project has been overrunning the initial thought of costs, I don't mind making changes that have zero or modest cost impact, but there's a point at which I'm like, well, maybe we have to start giving up some things that we might really like to have, just because we're spending so much money elsewhere.
Yes. So for this project, like many projects, we're kind of bounded by kind of the federal funding agreement that we have. So
I understand that. Right. You can't. You have to do certain things that we promised to do. Got that. All right. Unless there are any further questions, I think we need a motion. Let's do 10C followed by 10D, because I think the presentation covered both. So is there a motion on item 10C?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that we move to adopt Resolution 2014-37, a resolution of the City Council of San Carlos authorizing the city manager to execute an amendment to the professional services agreement with Swinnerton Management and Consulting in the amount of $125,580 for providing construction management services for the East Side Connect Project C9469 and the Old County Road Utility Undergrounding Project C9486.
Second.
Bob has seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. I'll entertain a motion on item 10D.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve Resolution 2014-38, resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing the expenditure of an additional $350,000 of construction contingency for the construction of the Old County Road Rural 20-A undergrounding project, C number C9486, and authorizing the city manager to execute a contract change order in the amount of $82,596.91.
Is there a second?
A second.
Motion and second. Any discussion?
So just to understand, this is contingency. It doesn't mean we necessarily will spend this. It just, if it comes up, we've got the authorization. Right. Just to be clear.
Yes, that's correct, and it's also contingency of other people's money.
I like that. Another good contingency to have. Good question. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. That brings us to public hearing. Item 11, consideration of a resolution authorizing adjustments to the 2014-2015 cost of services, parentheses, user fees, close parentheses, schedule for certain city services.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I'd like to give you the option before we begin this item to give you the full presentation or the super short presentation, whatever you would prefer.
I actually have a third question to ask, which is timing-wise, do we need to address this tonight?
We do.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Super short?
Anybody object to going with the super short?
I read the memos.
I read it.
So.
Matt?
Yeah. In the interest of time, sure.
Council, then I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here, and then Rebecca can jump in and answer any questions you might have. But last year, the council did a comprehensive fee analysis study, and as part of that study in setting fees last year, you identified a methodology for using cost of living to adjust your fees on a go-forward basis. So this is the first year where that methodology you identified last year as being employed. That's resulting in a 2% across-the-board increase in the fees on the existing fee schedule. There are 3 exceptions to that in new fees that are being created: a fee for the bocce ball courts, which are obviously new facilities, a fee related to picnic reservations, and the new encroachment permit fee, which the council discussed in the last few weeks in terms of its creation for working with utilities and undergrounding. That's it. That's all that's changing, the 2% in those fees. The reason that we do need to adopt this tonight is there's a 60-day period before this can go into effect. I'll remind you, Mr. Mayor, that this is in fact a public hearing, so you'll need to open and close the public comment process formally.
Very
Happy
good.
to answer any questions you might have.
And I take it I should probably open the public comment process as we speak. All right, so, all right, then we will do questions first, which I think there may be some. Matt, did you have some questions? Okay, Cameron?
Comments, yes, but no questions.
This is maybe a comment masquerading as a question, but I think it would be, it's hard to evaluate fees without knowing what revenue they generate. And I think about it from a pricing perspective. You know, there are certain things that we really want to encourage in the city. We want to encourage people to use public facilities. We want to encourage people to open new businesses. And if there's a relatively high fee that's not generating very much revenue, my desire would be to reduce that fee with the hope that it would increase usage. And so looking at a fee in isolation doesn't really allow me to make a trade-off in terms of the benefit to the city versus city revenue, et cetera. So I mean, in principle, well, we can talk further in the discussion, but so there is actually no question there. Or let me actually phrase the question: is there a record? Does staff have a record of the revenue on a per fee basis, and is that something that's easy to get?
Yes, we do, and yes, it is.
Okay.
So we can provide.
I would just ask that as we consider fees in the future, I would love to see the revenue associated with them.
More in the summary, because this system generates 104,000.
On a line-by-line basis.
You want to see line item.
Other questions? All right. In that case, I will open the public hearing. Do we have any members of the public who wish to address the council on this matter? Greg, is there a minimum time we have to hold the hearing open for?
I think you're safe at this point.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Do we need to call the roll on that, or can we just do affirmation?
On that one, it could be affirmation.
All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay. Discussion. Well, actually, I'm sorry. We need a motion to adopt the resolution before we do discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to resolution number 2014-39. I'm sorry, 39. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing adjustments to the 2014-2015 cost of services user fees schedule for certain city services.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Discussion. Matt, did you have some comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, just I'm inclined to vote against raising our fees just based on my own experience. And that mostly, where I tend to interact mostly with the city is in my professional life. And I'm always shocked when I bring in my projects and submit them and, have to, I pass it on to the client. It's not like I pay it, so it doesn't hurt me in that way. But it's always shocking to me the fees that have to be paid for design review for residential projects. I just did a commercial project recently, which I don't do very often. But in that case, I had charged a higher rate because I had to get something in right before Christmas, and I told the client, look, I was looking to spend some time with my family, so I'm going to charge you a higher rate, which they agreed to. And I know it's a concern to clients because immediately after Christmas, when they asked me to do some more work on the project, they said, can you lower your fee? because you raised it, in light of the holidays. And I said, sure. So I lowered it back down to my normal commercial rate. So it is a concern to clients, but when you get to City Hall and you have to pay that fee, there's no competition, there's no questions, there's no choice. They have you by the, I won't say it, but we all know what the term is.
Short hairs.
Short hairs. And you just, you have to accept it, you have to pay it, and there you are. And this is going to sound a little crude, but it's just honest. I know what I charge my customers, and I know how much I make a year, and I know how much time I can work on my projects and to earn the kind of living that I do. And there's obviously a rate there that the market will bear, and there's only so many hours in a day that I can put into my work, and so I know what I can make. And I compare that, quite frankly, to what our employees earn that are in similar industry, in design, the planners and the people in the building department and so forth. And I look at their benefits and the whole thing, and I hate to pick on anybody, but to me the whole system's out of whack. When you look at what somebody who owns their own business and is a professional can earn versus what our employees are earning, and part of their compensation comes from this fee schedule. The way we figure out this fee schedule is, how much time does city staff spend on a project, and what do we need to try and recoup? And the thing is that's further interesting to me is it even admits in this staff report, this is not a full it's not a full cost recovery. It's only partial, which makes my argument even more strident. But I just, I think that fees are high enough. And my last comment to the whole thing is, we're using the cost of living index, the increase to the cost of living. To me, one of the greatest influences to that cost of living is the cost of government, and not just at the local level, but at all levels. And so government, in many ways, is driving the cost of living and then being compensated for it. So I just cannot support adding to that.
Other comments? All right. We have a motion and a second. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And with that,
We still have
FG and H. With that, we still have FG and H.
That's right.
I think, given that, I will ask for a motion to extend the meeting to.
I think this will be pretty quick.
Then we'll extend the meeting to 10 of 11.
I think we can do it in 5 minutes.
I think we can do it
All
in 5
right.
minutes.
They're all the same
You know
item.
what? I like people who are optimistic. There we go. All right. Item 8F, authorize reappointment of Vadim Axelrod to the Economic Development Advisory Commission for the term ending June 30th, 2017.
Question for the city attorney. Since we pulled these off the consent calendar and they could have been approved all at one time, can we approve all three at one time or disapprove all three at one time or whatever?
If they have a common result in the motion, that you can consider them all at once and then make one motion to approve.
Okay, because I'll just give you the reason I pulled them. We've talked about this before, and I pulled them to vote against them, not because I have anything personal about the people who are in these positions or anything like that, but just that I really think we need to change our policy, and when we have somebody's term come to term, that we should open it up and make it available to new applicants and put the existing person who wants to continue in that mix, but open it up, do interviews, et cetera. And we've not made the move on that, so I can no longer vote to just continue to push people along when I don't agree with the process.
Okay. Before we get to a motion, just because I like to sort of tag these things as we see them, that actually is you're proposing a policy change discussion.
It is.
Is there anybody else in the dais who would like to see that added to our agenda?
Well,
Our agenda, not the current agenda.
I think if I didn't agree to add it, I'd be a little hypocritical, since that was exactly the way I voted last year with a member of one of our commissions, that I wanted to interview other candidates, and I wanted that member to re-interview for his position. So
remember, you're thorough. consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds.
Okay, I'll be small-minded, I don't want to be hypocritical.
That's fine. So you are supporting having that discussion added?
Yes,
with
I
you?
am supporting
Fine,
having
good. Jeff, if you would add that to our list.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I move we reappoint Vadim Axelrod to the Economic Development Commission, Bonnie McClure to the Residential Design Review Committee, and Angela Harper Peterson to the Planning Commission.
All for terms ending June 30th, 2017.
All for terms ending June 30th, 2017.
Is there a second?
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, call the roll, please.
Councilmember Collins?
No.
Councilmember Basili?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And with that,
We're done.
we are adjourned.
Boy, 2 minutes.